Chapter 1093. Even though Lu Songtao knew what Wang Xinji was thinking, he still blocked his way. With a falling sword style, countless Bodhisattva Dharma appearances were summoned and trapped Wang Xinji. There were high and low Bodhisattva Dharma appearances. Some were so clear that they could be seen while others were vague. Among them, there were 4 Bodhisattva Dharma appearances that were the most majestic, guarding the 4 directions. There was Guanyin, who removed the suffering of all living beings, Manjushri, who was pure and untainted, Samantabhadra, who had no intention of turning back, and Ksitigarbha, who wished to become a Buddha after saving all living beings. Among them, Samantabhadra was the most vivid and amiable. It was due to Wang Xiaoping's sword heart that would not back down no matter what. After Wang Xinji stepped on the ground, he abruptly withdrew his fists. With him as the center, an aura that was strong enough to overshadow the surging waves of the martial emperor's city gushed out without restraint. Wherever the aura touched, regardless of whether they were on the ground or still in the air, most of them collapsed with a loud bang. Some of them were on the verge of collapse, obviously showing signs of collapsing. Only the 4 bodhisattvas remained motionless. Manjushri even opened his golden mouth slightly, chanting scriptures. Above his head, there were vaguely fairies with long sleeves flying around. Between heaven and earth, golden light overflowed and fluorescent, as if they were in a Buddhist land on the other side. The strongest person in Jianghu 100 years ago met the strongest person in the present. This magnificent battle had indeed reached a level that was not recorded in ancient books and unimaginable by modern people. Wang Xinji did not use his qi to form swords or sabers. His figure turned illusory and punched in all directions. Before the phantoms could merge into one, a snow-white flowing light bypassed Manjushri Dharma appearance and rushed to Lu Songtao, who was meditating. Behind Lu Songtao, an Akalanatha of esoteric sect appeared, looking angry. After being hit by Wang Xinji's body, Lu Songtao's sitting posture did not change at all, but he slid back 100 feet. After another hit, there was a thunderous sound. Lu Songtao, who was sitting on the ground with his palms together, retreated again and again. However, when he and his Dharma appearance were retreating, the Akalanatha let out a muffled roar. If the people were stubborn, they would have been awakened by the roar. If they were stubborn demons, they would have been scared away. Unfortunately, the one who came was Wang Xinji, a warrior who could compete with the immortal Lu Dongxian. For the 3rd strike, Wang Xinji, who was standing, kicked Lu Songtao's forehead. He directly kicked the cult master of the devil cult, who had put down the butcher knife and sat on the ground to cultivate Buddhism for 100 years, into the ground. The Dharma idol of the Akala Wisdom King sank deep into the ground, only revealing the frightened face that was on the verge of collapse. At the same time, the 4 bodhisattvas in the distance turned into fireflies and slowly rose into the sky. Wang Xinji stopped her simple but invincible attack. For the first time, a trace of anger appeared on the old man's face. He asked in a deep voice, "Do you know that someone has a wish?" Lu Songtao, who was still on the ground, stood up, turned around, put his palms together and bowed. He took the initiative to disperse the last Dharma form. Then he slowly walked on the slanted mud road that was as flat as a sword. He stood in front of Wang Xinji, nodded and replied softly, "I hope that everyone in the younger generation can open the gate of heaven with a sword." Wang Xinji said indifferently, "I'm just an old man who only has Jianghu in my eyes." Lu Songtao thought for a while and said calmly, "You think that the rise and fall of the world is the responsibility of kings, ministers and scholars. If they do well, they can't bear the burden of peace and prosperity. People in chaos are worse than dogs. Anyway, you, Wang Xinji, only take the burden of martial arts. But what you think, I also have my own thoughts. In the end, it's because our paths are different, so our plans are different. In order to win the world, the 2 dynasties of Liang and Beimang lacked military provisions and money, so they used all kinds of banners to destroy Buddhism. Not only did they let the Taoist priests seal the mountain gate of the 2 Zen temples, but they also destroyed countless temples and scriptures. Not only that, they also tried their best to eradicate the inheritance of Buddhism. Lu Songtao wanted to burn a stick of incense for Buddhism at this time and place. It's not that I, Lu Songtao, want to flatter the young vassal king of Beiliang, but I want to do my best for Buddhism. I want to protect the last pure land as much as possible. Even if it's just to let a monk have a place to stand, it's also a good thing." Wang Xinji waved her hand. "I still have to hurry, so I don't want to waste my breath on you." The purple gold color on Lu Songtao's face was unstable. He suddenly asked with a smile, "Wang Xinji, how much effort did you put in?" Wang Xinji didn't answer but asked back, "To stop or not to stop?" Lu Songtao turned sideways and stretched out his hand. Since I, Lu Songtao of Zhulu Mountain, have no more requests, I've already let go. Besides, taking off the kasaya doesn't mean that I'm no longer a monk. I can't die for the time being. Besides, you may not be able to kill that person. Wang Xinji didn't say anything and brushed past Lu Songtao. In the end, Lu Songtao still didn't know if Wang Xinji had put in all her effort, but he didn't expect it either. It was enough if she had done it. 100 years later, the water level of Jianghu was much higher than before. He came a little late, but at least he wasn't too late. Lu Songtao walked to the shore of Guangling and cupped a handful of murky river water to wash away the bloodstains. He wanted to carry Wudong Wang Xiaoping on his back, but he lost his balance and sat on a pile of wet stones. He sighed and got up with difficulty. He looked to the south. It's a pity that the peach blossom sword god, who I've only heard of but never seen, probably won't come. Lu Songtao endured the stinging pain and rushed to find Wang Xiaoping. He bent down and carried this Wudong Taoist priest who could overlook the sword forest after Dong Tai. He straightened his back and said softly, Gao Shulu's body, your peachwood sword, and my Buddhist fate. Together the odds of winning are still not high. Lu Songtao smiled bitterly. Is it unfortunate that there's such an old man suppressing Jianghu? Or is it fortunate? It's fine for us, but that vassal king must be very unfortunate. On the other side of the river, Zhao Huangqiao was nowhere to be found. At the bottom of the river, the woman who was lucky enough to survive the battle was still there. Lu Songtao stared blankly at the rolling East River, silent. Thinking back to those years, she used to laugh and say that there were partridges in the south of Jiangnan, and that she couldn't do it. Chapter 1094. Lu Songtao closed his eyes and silently chanted Amitabha. After opening his eyes, he strode forward. Wang Xinji's fists were like rainbows, striking the purple clothes of Mount Huishan to the bottom of the river. Then she blocked the sword of Wang Xiaoping after she died. She even got rid of the demon-turned Buddhist Lu Songtao in one go. In one day she had fought with 3 top masters in succession without too much trouble. But the indisputable number 1 person in the world, the city lord of Martial Emperor City, was tormented by an unknown girl who did not know when to advance or retreat. The first inexplicable attack happened at the end of the Songxian River, a tributary of the Guangling River. At the time, Wang Xinji was surprised that before she leapt out of the river, he did not sense any trace of her. The old man was just curious. Towards her vicious hand chop, it was more of a senior's appreciation of the younger generation. He was not angry at all. After dodging, he did not pursue. Watching the girl's figure disappear into the distance, he bent down and left the battlefield. He ran like a fox, extremely fast. The main thing was that she came and went in a hurry, almost not affecting her chi. It was not easy. At the time, Wang Xinji only thought of a rumor that had been widely spread in Martial Emperor City. The former 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, was killed by a young female assassin's sinister hand chop. At the time, Wang Xinji did not pay much attention to it. Later, when she received a secret that was absolutely true, she remembered this assassin. She took the opportunity to kill the gatekeeper of Great Peace City, the celestial phenomenon expert Lu Haosher. She must be the little girl who came to make the 4th stone. For homophonic death. Little girl, this is not very auspicious. At the beginning, Wang Xinji felt that the girl was quite interesting. If they met, she could chat with her for a while to relieve her boredom. After half a year, they met for the second time. It was on a post road near River Prefecture. Wang Xinji was walking slowly under the shade of a willow tree. A caravan of merchants passed by. When the last rider was about to pass by Wang Xinji, the girl assassin suddenly darted out from under the horse's belly. She ran close to the ground and then leapt up quickly. Again with a hand chop, she stabbed towards Wang Xinji's heart. Wang Xinji grabbed her wrist and threw her out. Her delicate body smashed through a willow tree that was as thick as a blue and white flower bowl. Wang Xinji originally thought that the girl would know the severity of the matter after 3 times. Unexpectedly, in the middle of the night, a sneak attack followed. Wang Xinji closed his eyes and rested in the wilderness. He sat and slept for a full 6 hours. It wasn't until midnight that the young girl broke out of the ground 10 feet away. Even Wang Xinji didn't know how she guessed that he would sit and rest in that place, because no matter how profound the Chimenduanjiao was, it was impossible to make any undetectable movements under his eyes. This time, Wang Xinji, who did not care whether he was asleep or awake, still turned his head slightly hurriedly to avoid the girl assassin's hand chop. In the first fight, Wang Xinji had already confirmed that the girl's hand chop was very strange. It was a novel technique that he had never heard of before. It was clean and neat and was good at breaking gang chi. Even the body of an ordinary martial artist in the Vajra realm might not be able to withstand it. Moreover, the girl's hand chop was almost masochistic. Therefore, in the moment before the hand chop succeeded, she could burst out a unique mysterious finger technique. It was similar to the peeling skin and tendons of the human cat Han Xingxian. It could be said that her hand chop could easily kill Jianghu masters below the first rank. However, her original intention was more abnormal. She aimed to assassinate celestial phenomenon and land immortal in the latter two realms of the first rank. Who in the world could have taught such an unreasonable killer? Therefore, in the third fight, Wang Xinji, who had been sitting cross-legged, turned his head sideways to avoid the hand chop. He also grabbed the girl's ankle and slammed her to the ground in front of him. At the same time he asked, "What's your name?" The girl jumped out of the big hole that was created by her body. She did not make a sound and disappeared in a flash. Wang Xinji was just a little helpless. He did not get up and chase after her. He treated her more like a naughty child with a bad temper. Soon Wang Xinji's helplessness turned into annoyance. The girl assassin did not know when to stop. Only 3 days later Wang Xinji entered the border of River Province, which was near Bailiang Road, and launched another ingenious attack. Wang Xinji was drinking water from a deep well. The girl slid out along the wall of the well without warning and stabbed her hand chop toward Wang Xinji's neck. Annoyed that she did not know what was good for her, Wang Xinji hit her head with his elbow. She fell to the bottom of the well and fell into the water. Wang Xinji did not show too much mercy with this elbow. Even if she was a first-rank Vajra realm master, she would have to cultivate for a year and a half before she could get out of bed and walk. However, the girl assassin, who later appeared with a pale face, still diligently carried out the fifth assassination. Wang Xinji walked in the downtown area. The girl in ragged clothes rushed out from a dark and narrow alley. This time Wang Xinji directly punched her head. The girl's head fell back and crashed into a restaurant. She broke an outer wall and a few tables. She slumped against the inner wall of the restaurant. Wang Xinji said coldly, "Next time you will really die." The stubborn girl pressed her weak back against the wall and tiptoed on the ground. She tried to use this as a support to stand up. However, she sat down again after standing halfway. She did not know how many times she did this, but it was all in vain. Half a day later. It was the last time. Wang Xinji walked on the post-house road at the border of the two prefectures. He could already see the boundary stone that connected the two prefectures. Next to the tall boundary stone there was a girl. She was still wearing a slanted mink hat and carrying a sunflower. She just stood there. She seemed to be foolishly trying to guard herself. The girl snorted. She did not have the strength to assassinate anyone. She had no choice but to stand in his way. Then she raised her arm and wiped away the blood that had seeped out of her nose or mouth. She gently placed the sunflower on the boundary stone. Then she carefully took off her mink hat and pulled out an old pearl hairpin. She placed them together with the sunflower that was far from its golden color. Chapter 1095. Numerous riders galloped out of Great Peace City. They were all the best posthuman of Liang. The posthuman they rode was actually the emperor's beloved Fergana horse. The posthuman riders galloped wildly on the imperial street. Everywhere they passed, no one dared to stop them. The leader of the courier riders carried an urgent imperial edict that was 800 li away. The imperial edict did not follow the rules of etiquette. Other than being stamped with the national seal of Emperor Liang, there were only 4 words on the golden silk: fight or retreat. When the courier riders galloped out of the city, there just happened to be a person slowly walking through the southern city gate. The Fergana horse actually passed right through this person's body. There was no scene of the person being thrown off his horse, nor was there a scene of flesh and blood. The rider continued south to deliver the urgent secret edict. The visitor from Great Peace City still entered the city unscathed. There weren't even any soldiers patrolling the city to capture this person. All of the soldiers and commoners near the southern gate ignored him. After he entered the city, he went all the way to the Shemawei courier station and stopped under a dragon claw scholar tree. He saw 14 men with sabers walk out of this courier station that was specially provided for the soldiers of the Su family. They all mounted their horses and headed towards the imperial city. The young man under the dragon claw scholar tree followed behind like an immortal riding the wind. From beginning to end, no one looked at him. However, he recognized them, or rather, he could guess their identities. The leader of the group was an old man called Feng Ling. He came from the grasslands of Liaodong and was a fierce general under Su Zhao's command. He was 60 years old and had become a third-rank high official in the capital 2 years ago through his own military achievements. It had to be known that at the beginning of summer last year, Su Zhao had only been a second-rank high official. The last rider was Zhu Changfu, who came from the horse bandits of Liaoxi and was the founder of the fish drum camp. He had not recovered from his heavy injuries and was temporarily in the capital. He was unable to follow the cavalry of the Su family down south. Next was the surrendered General Zhang Dujian. In the end, he retired from the position of commander of the Lotus Seed Camp. Qin Yun was an old soldier and had only been a high official, like a sergeant, in his entire life. Zhao Fengyang, a native of Jizhou, was the most senior scout in the Su family's army. Ever since he was shot in the back by a poisonous arrow, he would fall ill every time it rained. The pain seeped into his bones, so he had no choice but to retire from the army. Song Kaiwan, nicknamed Shaking Head Scholar, had studied for a few days and liked to shake his head when talking with people. He used to be the military advisor of a group of bandits in Liaoxi. However, he ran into Su Xiao, who was still a lieutenant at that time, and was wiped out. Song Kaiwan profited from his misfortune and turned from a bandit to a soldier. As he grew older, he found it harder and harder to ride a horse, so he opened a restaurant in Great Peace City. As long as one was a comrade of the Su family's cavalry, there would be enough meat, wine, and food to fill their stomachs. Thus, he had been doing business at a loss all these years, but the old scholar didn't feel any heartache. He was always nagging at his wife and children. In total, there were 14 of them. They were all old men who had luckily survived the rain of spears and arrows. They should have spent their later years in the capital. At this very moment, the two northern regimes that historians would call Northern Han and Eastern Yu had been destroyed one after another. During this period, Su Xiao first forced the death of Northern Han's great general Fan, who had the reputation of being the divine wood of the great Han. Like a hot knife through butter, he led his army to break into the imperial palace and rode his horse into the throne room. On the other side of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang led 1,000 cavalrymen into Luzhou on a snowy night, opening the door to Eastern Yu in one fell swoop. Gu Jiantang easily captured half of the country without shedding a drop of blood. Next to the bed of the Zhao family in Liang, there were no outsiders sleeping soundly. Afterwards, the Zhao family's son stood on the side of Su and Gu, two young and strong military officers who had rendered meritorious service. Against the objections of the masses, he insisted on a decisive battle that would decide the fate of the world with De Chu, whose soldiers and majestic armor were not inferior to Liang's. However, after the Battle of Jinghe, the battle to the death at the imperial concubine's grave, and several major battles in succession, Liang's troops, who had always held the absolute advantage in the previous battles, began to suffer setbacks one after another. Until the two armies confronted each other at the western wall, neither side dared to claim that victory was in their grasp. Moreover, De Chu had the war Saint Yi Baikue, who was known to be victorious in 100 battles, personally holding the line. The people in the Liang imperial court began to waver. Following Su Zhao's holding back for a long time, the rumors and slanders in the capital covered the sky and covered the earth. There were even several extremely important secret spy reports that were sent into the imperial palace with irrefutable evidence. The De Chu emperor's personal sealed secret letter was placed on Su Zhao's desk in the barracks. He wanted to rule the world together with Su Xiao, who had suffered grievances in the Liang imperial court. The pro-war faction in the imperial court that advocated first conquering De Chu and then conquering the world did not have many people to begin with. With the two armies facing each other at the western wall, victory and defeat were hard to predict. If they lost, they would lose the entire northern territory that they had fought so hard to conquer. Even Gu Jiantang, who the imperial court had placed high hopes on, began to choose to remain silent and slow down the speed of their advance to the south. As a result, no one in the Liang imperial court was willing to speak up for Su Xiao. All of Su Zhao's past acts of overstepping his authority were listed out. All of the civil and military officials in the imperial court urged the emperor to quickly recall the 300,000 troops that Liang had stationed at the western wall. Otherwise, if Su Xiao harbored any thoughts of rebellion, not only would he be able to fight for the world with De Chu, even Liang's assets would be overturned. The old man, Feng Ling, sat high on his horse. The imperial city gates in his field of vision grew taller and taller. His horsemanship was skillful. Although he had been living in Great Peace City for the past few years, he had never fallen behind. The old man tilted his head and fiercely spat at the imperial street. He stretched out his thumb and habitually wiped the corner of his mouth. He muttered, "You bastards are all acting like you're dying in front of the emperor. If you're not wearing mourning clothes, you're making people carry your coffins. There's even someone who pretended to ram his head into a beam in the throne room. In the end, your mother, not a single one of you died. I'll let you cowards know how the Su family's cavalry lives and how they die." The 14 riders arrived outside the imperial city gates. Feng Ling stopped his horse in the middle and the other 13 riders lined up in a line. Then the 14 of them dismounted at the same time. They let go of the reins at the same time and touched the necks of their horses. Zhang Dujin grinned and turned to look at Song Kaiwan. Shaking head, scholar, we're all rough men and can't speak. You're the only one who's educated, why don't you do it? Song Kaiwan rolled his eyes and said, change to someone with a louder voice. Qin Yun, who single-handedly established the first ascension camp, said softly, fuck his mother. I really want to have a chance to climb up the city gates with my brothers and plant our Su family's flag. Zhao Fengyang laughed and scolded, son of a bitch, if you do that, won't that confirm the rumors of us rebelling? Shut your crooked mouth. Feng Ling touched the hilt of the saber at his waist and said softly, it doesn't matter how loud we are. Even if those officials hear us, they'll just pretend they didn't hear us. Even if Song Kaiwan agreed with others, he would subconsciously shake his head and say with a smile, I, old Song, only know how to come up with bad ideas. I've never been to the battlefield, let alone charge and break through the enemy lines. Why don't I, old Song, go first today? Jianghu, who had always looked down on Song Kaiwan, gave him a thumbs up and said with a smile, Scholar Song, you've been cowardly and afraid of death all your life, but this time you're a real man. I, Jianghu, have scolded you many times before, but today I'm convinced. I'll give you a compliment and apologize to you. Zhu Zhangfu laughed softly and said, it's too late. Once we're underground, old Song won't have any restaurants for us to drink. The old scholar exhaled heavily and looked at his old brothers on both sides. He said in a deep voice, Song Kaiwan will go first. At the same time, Feng Ling angrily shouted, draw your sabers. 14 Su family sabers, 14 lives. Generously going to their deaths. The young man was like a lonely ghost that was neither in the world of the living nor the world of the dead. He could only stand quietly behind the 14 people and watch as they slit their own throats at the same time and fell backward almost at the same time. He walked to Feng Ling's side, squatted down and slowly stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to help the old man close his eyes. Dantong Pass. Inside the pass there were restrictions and countless sentries. Outside the pass, there were nearly 1,000 elite cavalrymen patrolling the area all day long. Chapter 1096. They appeared to be a large group of nobles protecting the pass, but everyone inside and outside the pass knew. Even the young children and youths knew that they were pitiful hostages, who could not be sure of their fate. Their life and death depended on whether their parents had won the trust of the old man sitting on the dragon throne of Great Peace City. Dan Tong Pass, which would not appear in history books in the future, imprisoned many of the royal relatives and nobles who would affect the structure of the dynasty in the future. There was the king of Beiliang's concubine Wu Su and the second king of Beiliang Su Fengyin, the only son of the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying, the future crown prince Zhao Zhu, the eldest son and daughter of the general Gu Jiantang, and so on. They had one thing in common, and that was that their relatives outside the pass were all staunch supporters of war. They could decide the situation of a time, a place, and even a dynasty or a country. But the most important of these people was undoubtedly the female sword Immortal, the current sword crown of the Wu family, Wu Su. If it weren't for her existence, Dan Tong Pass wouldn't have needed to muster so many troops to guard it. This night, a little beggar ran through the dark alleys with familiarity. He kept close to the shadows of the walls. When he reached the outer wall of a courtyard, he gently pried open a pile of loose bricks and revealed a hole the size of a dog hole. The little beggar sneaked in and picked up 3 small stones. He bent over and snuck under a window. He threw 2 stones on the window paper. When he threw the 3rd stone, he heard a muffled sound of pain. Then a figure jumped out of the window. The little beggar said helplessly, "Little Nian, didn't we agree to open the window after 3 stones?" The companion who was hit by the stone was a child even younger than the little beggar. He had delicate features and a rare northern and southern face. He glared at the little beggar and said in a low voice, "You're so stubborn. You want to learn swordsmanship from my mother?" The little beggar smiled and then grabbed his companion's sleeve. He said anxiously, "My teacher is taking me away from here tonight. Are you coming or not? If you are, let's run together." The scholarly child shook his head and said, "My mother said, it's not that we can't leave, it's that we can't leave." The little beggar felt a headache coming on. "Why are you still speaking in riddles at this time? You're so well read. Are you going to leave or not? I begged teacher for half the night to get this chance. If we miss this chance, we may never see each other again." At this point, the little beggar's eyes turned red. The other child grinned. "I'm really not leaving. The books say that all good things must come to an end. But don't worry, the books also say that it's a small world. The little beggar scratched his head anxiously. Apparently he was completely confused by this young man. Little Nian chuckled. You have a teacher? Is he an old beggar? The little beggar quickly shook his head and said, Of course not. He was a very, very learned scholar. Little Nian smirked. How big is very big? Are they as big as Sister Swallow's breasts on the street next door? The little beggar said helplessly, Little Nian, are you really not leaving? I really don't care about you anymore. If I don't go back, teacher will be worried to death. The child nodded and asked the little beggar to wait for a while. He jumped back into the house through the window and quickly jumped back out. He was very familiar with it and stuffed a bag into the little beggar's hands. He touched the little beggar's head and said like an old man, Originally we said that we would fight together in the future. You are strong, so you will fight in the front. I am more literate, so I will give you advice and advice. Now it seems that we can't. Take this bag of money. When you go out, a hero can't die without a single coin. Hey, aren't you always hungry for chicken legs? Remember to buy 2 when you reach a safe place. Even if I eat them, I will eat them. The little beggar carefully put away the bag and raised his arm to wipe his eyes. Just as he was about to say the secret that his father told him not to tell anyone in the pass, little Nian had already pushed him. Hurry up and leave. What are you waiting for? After you leave, I will call mother to practice swordsmanship in the courtyard. She might be able to help you a little. The little beggar choked and sobbed. Little Nian, you must not die. In the future I will definitely find you. In this life I will only recognize you as my brother. The child was a few years younger than the little beggar, but he seemed to be far more mature than the little beggar. Instead he comforted him. How old are you? You will be with me for the rest of your life. Go. In the history books, those who have achieved great things can even lose their father's wife and son. They are not as wishy-washy as you. The little beggar nodded heavily and turned back to leave. In the shadow of the dog hole, he waved to little Nian. Little Nian waved his hand. After the little beggar left, the child, who had been very indifferent and optimistic, squatted at the corner of the wall. He hugged his knees and secretly sniffed. Suddenly, his head was gently patted. The child was startled and quickly turned his head. In the end, he saw his mother's warm smile. He hurriedly wiped away his tears and said softly, Mother, don't tell father that I cried. The woman with unparalleled appearance brought her son to sit by the window. She laughed softly and said, Little Nian, you must remember that men do not cry easily. That is only because they have not been hurt. When you are really hurt, cry if you want to, don't hold it in your heart. The child uttered an oh. The woman smiled and said, Go get the sword case. The child excitedly said, Did mother agree? Okay, I will go right away. The child jumped down from the windowsill and moved the red sandalwood sword case, which was almost as tall as him. The woman came to the courtyard and looked back with a smile. She saw her son struggling to carry the sword case. She took the sword case. The child turned around and trotted to sit on the steps. He held his cheeks and stared at his mother without blinking. Father said with his own mouth that mother could beat 100 of him. The woman raised the red sandalwood sword case and pressed one hand on the top of the case. She did not immediately drive the world-famous Great Liang Dragon Sparrow out of the sword case. Although the famous sword was hidden in the case, the sword power was already surging. A series of sharp screeches suddenly sounded in Dantong Pass. The woman stood with her hands behind her back. The sword case trembled slightly. Wisps of purple sword chi continuously seeped out of the sword case, illuminating the entire courtyard with purple chi. The Great Liang Dragon Sparrow, which made everyone in Dantong Pass feel as if they were facing a great enemy, unexpectedly did not come out of the case for a full quarter of an hour. However, all the armored soldiers and Jianghu experts in Dantong Pass had long been in a panic. Everyone was on edge. Fortunately, for some reason, the woman's sword Immortal changed her original intention of using the sword to break through the pass. This made Dantong Pass feel relieved. To be honest, they were 30% vigilant, 30% fearful, and 40% respectful of this woman who came out of Wu family's sword tomb. They really did not want to face her head-on. In the courtyard, the mother and son looked at each other and smiled knowingly. The child carried the sword case back and put it away. Then he went out of the house and sat with his mother on the steps, looking at the sky full of stars. Meanwhile, a young man who seemed close by but was actually far away was sitting not far away, accompanying them. The child put his head on his mother's knee and asked curiously, Mother, eldest sister said that after people die, they will become stars in the sky. Second sister said no. Then will they? The woman touched the child's head and smiled. I don't know. The child sighed. If only I could grow up faster. The woman shook her head and smiled. It's better if you don't grow up. The child stood up and put his hand higher than his head. He smiled. Mother, believe it or not, when I wake up tomorrow, I will be this tall. The woman smiled and did not speak. The child raised his hand and jumped a few times. I will be this tall the day after tomorrow. The woman stood up and stood in front of the child. She raised her hand, which was higher than her own. Then she lowered her head and said softly, Little Nian, grow up slowly. Don't worry. Sooner or later you will be this tall. Then she raised her head, looked at that height and smiled. Behind little Nian. It happened to be the height that the woman gestured. Su Fengnian, who was in an out-of-body state, looked at her with tears streaming down his face. He softly called, Mother. Chapter 1097. The two armies faced off against each other at the western wall. They had just survived the damned rainy season. The muddy ground gradually hardened. An imperial edict from Tai and city was somehow made public and spread widely. It was like a thunderclap that suddenly exploded on the ground, shaking people's hearts. Su Xiao from Liang had used most of the Su family's elite cavalry to win the Battle of Jianghu. He had used up all of De Chu's so-called invincible great halberd warriors. His morale was at its peak. He only needed a suitable time to make the final decision at the western wall. Then the imperial edict came out. All his efforts were in vain. The encirclement around De Chu had not been completely completed. Now it was even looser. The balance of power that had been exchanged with the lives of hundreds of thousands of Su family soldiers instantly became a precarious situation. The northeast defense line was still fine. After all, Gu Jiantang had already destroyed Dongyue without any effort. Most of the Gu elites were still there. Even if they did not go south to support Su Zhao's army as promised, they were still a blade hanging over De Chu's head. However, General Zhao Bodong, who had been avoiding direct battles during the expedition to the south, even though he was only responsible for the easy task of building the northwest defense line, as one of the few high-ranking officials and generals with royal family background, he abandoned the task at the crucial moment. He retreated 600 miles in one breath as if he was determined to watch the fire burn on the other side of the river. Without a doubt, he was giving away the great victory of the Battle of Jianghu. Compared to Su Xiao, who had exhausted himself on the battlefield at the western wall, Zhao Bodong had come into contact with the imperial edict earlier. Therefore, when his army retreated through the night to the lead mountain pass 600 miles away from the tomb of the concubines, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the true battle between the two countries had already surfaced. At that time, De Chu, who still had the advantage in terms of military strength, only needed to retake the tomb of the concubines to gain greater strategic depth. As long as Su Xiao, who was at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, dared to divide his forces to attack the tomb of the concubines, the war Saint Yi Baikue could be the first to blow the horn on the western wall. How could Yi Baikue, who had never been defeated, turn a blind eye to this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? The reason why De Chu had fallen into the current predicament was that Su Xiao had fought a series of battles that were almost desperate. His adopted son, Chu Lushan, who was not well known, had stood out in these battles. It was this fat man, who was good at killing 1,000 enemies but losing 800 of his own men, who had beaten De Chu's northern army with a kind of unreasonable and vicious method. This had helped Qin Jibao to clear out all the periphery of the northern front, and finally led to the great victory at the Jianghu River, forcing De Chu to retreat and station their troops at the western wall. So, they had lost the advantage in terms of manpower but lost the advantage in terms of geographical advantage. Yi Baikue, as De Chu's stabilizing force, was known as a great military strategist who could lead a country alone. At this time, he made a decision that would be debated endlessly in the history of future generations. He gave up on Chao Changqing, who had shown stunning military talent as a fledgling, and chose his trusted general Meng Hu, who had great experience, outstanding military service and a steady personality. He sent this person to lead an elite troop to the imperial concubine's grave. Before the Su family's army had to move out, there was a fierce dispute limited to a small area. The two strategists, Zhao Chongling and Li Yishan, finally had their first fierce disagreement. Zhao Chongling decided that since they had lost their momentum, and the Zhao Emperor had decreed to retreat without fighting, then the 300,000 troops led by the general would retreat to Liyang. They could openly retreat to the imperial concubine's grave, or even to Zhao Bodong's camp and eat this troop. Then they would have Gu Jiantang listen to orders and resolve the problem of Gu. Then they would fight to the death with De Chu and Yi Baikue. Li Yishan, on the other hand, believed that this retreat would allow Great Chu, who was barely breathing, to breathe a sigh of relief. Therefore Li Yishan suggested that they divide their forces decisively, but at the same time they could not divide too much. 20,000 was the limit. Zhao Chongling, who had always been gentle and refined, was furious. He scolded Li Yishan for being a child's play. Yi Baikue had clearly learned of the imperial edict and Zhao Bodong's retreat earlier than the general. De Chu had split 40 to 50,000 people from the already crowded west wall. It would not hurt them. But the general's 20,000 people would hurt the general's chances of victory in the battle between the two armies. It was also a muddle-headed move that was like throwing a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It was the same as going to the imperial concubine's grave to die for nothing. In the heavy atmosphere of the tent, there was a map of De Chu's situation hanging. The red and black lines that symbolized offense and defense were circled with cinnabar and charcoal. The arrows on the table used to accurately time the marching arrows were slowly dripping. Inside the tent, there was Su Xiao, who was in his 30s and could decide the fate of the world. Zhao Chongling and Li Yishan, who had been strategizing in the tent. The three adopted sons who had been urgently summoned into the tent, Chen Zhibao, Yuan Zuozong, and Chu Lushan, as well as a group of meritorious commanders of the infantry and cavalry. There was Wu Qi, a swordsman who had come with his sister from the Wu family sword tomb. He could be considered half of Chen Zhibao's military master. There was also Su Pu, whose reputation in the cavalry army did not lose to the general's brother-in-law Wu Qi. He was a rare scholarly general in the Su family army. There was also General Zhong Hongwu Yan Wenwan, who had been nicknamed Camp Step by Step, as well as Lu Yuanji, Wei Taizhan, and other generals. It could be said that if the dozen people in the tent were successfully assassinated, only half of them would die and the world would be De Chu's. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at these familiar and unfamiliar faces. They were the ones who had fought for Su Xiao. They did not see a young person standing under the map, his finger gently moving along the red and black marching routes. At the top of Wudong's Lotus Peak, the three people entered the spring and autumn to see the spring and autumn. This person had appeared in the tragic battle of Jing River, and then followed them to the western wall. But in his eyes, the people and objects in the spring and autumn were only divided into black and white. His joy, anger, sorrow, and joy would not affect the people in the spring and autumn. At this time, Zhong Hongwu had not yet taken control of the northern Liang cavalry. Before him there were still Wu Qi and Su Pu, two great mountains. Yan Wenwan was already blind in one eye, but he was the most new face in the tent. Compared to the future Chu Lushan seemed to be a few dozen caddies thinner. He was full of viciousness and did not have a flattering smile like a decade later. The famous white bear Yuan Zuozong probably did not care to take care of his beard. His beard was thick and he seemed even more heroic. The old General Hong Zhe had not died of illness outside Xiangfan City, and the great General Su Hengku had not died in western Shu. Su Fengnian looked at Zhao Chongling, who was standing next to Su Xiao. He looked at the side profile of this strategist from De Chu's Guangling Green Pavilion Zhao family. He was elegant and determined. Zhao Chongling was the kind of scholar that rulers and officials would admire at first sight. When attacking De Chu where the country was, Zhao Chongling did not show any mercy. On the contrary, the chief of the Su family's cavalry, De Chu, mostly came from his plans. Zhao Chongling was the main and Li Yishan was the support. The two strategists complemented each other. Su Fengnian moved his gaze slightly. The humble strategist who had been willing to let Zhao Chongling cover his edge had a calm expression under Zhao Chongling's aggressive questioning. At this time his master's expression was still very good. Chapter 1098. Li Yishan, who rarely argued with people, did not refute Zhao Chongling. He walked under the map and pointed at the concubine's grave. He looked at the people in the tent and said, Yi Baikue has already sent troops here. It is clear that if we were in his position, I would send two groups of soldiers, one light cavalry to deal with our reinforcements, and one slow heavy cavalry as a backup. There are countless silvers in the West Chu treasury, this is something everyone knows. Otherwise, our great general wouldn't say that after winning a battle, he would go to a mountain of gold and silver to have a good sleep. When Li Yishan said this, even Zhao Chongling's expression softened. Su Xiao grinned in embarrassment. The other generals smiled knowingly. Li Yishan continued, Great Chu has 2 gold nuggets. Those hundreds of thousands of great halberd warriors have been proven by us to be outdated and of little value. However, whether or not the 60,000 heavy cavalry under Yi Baikue's command are a burden remains to be discussed. Raising heavy cavalry burned money. One normal cavalry was the price of fattening 3 or 4 elite light cavalry. The pros and cons were clear. The cons were that heavy cavalry were hard to move before the battle started. Putting on the armor was slow and getting on the horse was slow. It could be said that other than getting on the horse to charge after everything was ready, everything else was slow. Also, turning was even slower. After successfully charging through the enemy formation, they could not stop. They had to circle around a large radius to cushion the blow before they could successfully turn and start a second charge. On a suitable battlefield, the heavy cavalry that many light cavalry generals ridiculed as one-shot deals are the kings of the battlefield. The concubine's grave, which is wide and easy to charge, is a suitable battlefield for Dechu's heavy cavalry to perform. Chongling said that if we divide our forces and go, as long as we do not have more than 50,000 people, we are going to die. Li Yishan's words were rushed. He clearly did not want to waste an inch of time. But he instinctively paused here and then said, "Of course we are going to die." Li Yishan quickly flipped his palm and continued, "As long as we can take down Dechu, then we can take down Shu, Tang and Nanzhao. That will be a small matter, as easy as turning over one's hand. We don't doubt it at all." It was precisely because our Su family's armored cavalry took the lead, charging forward battle after battle, that we were able to reach the western wall in one spurt of energy. But if we choose to retreat at this juncture and avoid the brunt of the attack, not only will we be able to defeat Dechu, but it will also be difficult to say whether the Grand General will be able to continue to hold military power. Many of us have died and more people will die in the future. However, at this time, 20,000 less people will die in the imperial concubine's tomb. All of our Su family members who died before will have died in vain. Li Yishan did not look at Zhao Chongling. He stared at Su Shao and said gravely, "Grand General, please let one person lead 20,000 light cavalry to die." Qin Jibao, who had rushed to the tent after patrolling various battlefields, said calmly, "Foster father, there is no need for 20,000 people. Give me 15,000 cavalry. But I want the strongest horses, the best spears and the best crossbows. I will go guard the imperial concubine's tomb." Zhao Chongling stared with a complicated expression at this young general he thought highly of. Yuan Zhuozong reached out and rubbed his beard stubble. He said with a smile, "Jibao still needs to understand the abilities and habits of the captains of the various armies in order to be able to command the last battle with ease. There are so many foreign troops and surrendered generals. We cannot delay. Let me, an idle person, go to the imperial concubine's tomb." Chu Lushan suddenly snickered and said, "Yuan Baixiong, are you more familiar with this kind of battle where everyone dies together? Do you not feel ashamed to fight with me?" Li Yishan said calmly, "Yi Baikue has the advantage in this battle of the imperial concubine's tomb. We will split into two groups and die first. The former will die slowly, the slower the better. It is best if we use up all of Dechu's light cavalry. We must even let Dechu's heavy cavalry make a charge. Zhuozong is skilled in cavalry battles that preserve strength." Yuan Zhuozong nodded. Chu Lushan glared and said, "Then the troops in the back should be mine, right?" Li Yishan shook his head and said, "If both sides are wounded, you can go. But in that case, Dechu will win in the end. Yi Baikue can continuously send troops to the imperial concubine's tomb. That will become a war of attrition against us. Other than using up the Grand General's strength, it will also use up Great Peace City's patience. But we cannot afford to lose in any aspect." Qin Jibao said with a smile, "I will go. Give 15,000 cavalry to Zhuozong. I only need 5,000 in the back. As long as Zhuozong can delay until Dechu's heavy cavalry enters the battlefield, I can guarantee to eat them all so that Yi Baikue will not dare to use a single soldier to touch the imperial concubine's tomb." Zhao Chongling said worriedly, "What if Yi Baikue suddenly starts a decisive battle now?" Commander-in-Chief Su Shao gently patted the shoulder of this strategist, who had the reputation of watertight, flawless planning, and laughed heartily. "Didn't the spy report say that the big trouble, Chao Changqing, is still in the south? Since Yi Baikue didn't use this person, it means that he probably doesn't dare to fight too early. What's more, he has the advantage now. He is a big shot of the Great Chu. There is no need for him to gamble with us, a group of barefoot paupers." The elegant Zhao Chongling had a bitter smile on his lips. In the end, he did not persist in his opinion. It was said that before the troops and horses moved, the provisions would move first. But this time, the 20,000 light cavalry had quietly traveled a long distance. Other than carrying some provisions, they did not make any extra movements. In order to fool people, Qin Jibao even rode his horse to the front of the western wall battlefield. He rode alone on a white horse with a long spear. Dechu's front army could clearly see this person's style. Yuan Zhuozong led the 15,000 cavalry to the imperial concubine's tomb. Their route was north and then east. Before getting on the horse, Li Yishan walked forward. His lips trembled but he did not speak. Yuan Zuozong suddenly folded his hands. His eyes were clear, his expression determined, and he did not speak. Su Xiao walked forward and said softly, Zuozong, foster father will not say anything good. Just one sentence. Even if you die, at least leave your corpse intact. When you enter the coffin in the future, foster father can help you wear a pair of cloth shoes that I sewed myself. Yuan Zuozong heard the discouraging words but was not angry at all. He smiled and said, no need, leave it for Xianyan to wear. Just treat it as Zuozong's gift to him. I have not given him anything for so many years. I feel bad. Su Xiao waved his hand and said, go. The 15,000 light cavalry quietly left the western wall in the middle of the night. Su Xiao stood in place. On his left was Zhao Chongling, and behind him was Li Yishan. He seemed to be the right hand of General Su Xiao. Chu Lushan squatted in front of his foster father and sulked. He pulled up a weed that was lucky not to be trampled by the horse hooves and chewed on it along with the mud. Su Xiao squatted down next to this foster son. He patted Chu Lushan's head and said with a smile, as long as we can eat the Chu this time, you will be the vanguard to open Shu. Foster father has already promised Zuozong. If he dies you can count his share. The damned fatty, who was more hostile than anyone in the Su family army when it came to fighting for military merits, was not happy at all for the first time. His fat head and big ears drooped. The Su family cavalry had groups of old people and new people. But ever since they followed Su Xiao out of Liao and fought to the western wall, there was no separation of life, only separation of death. Su Fengyin squatted next to Su Xiao. He wanted to tell Chu Lushan and Su Xiao, who was not hunched yet, that Yuan Zuozong would not die, and they would not lose the battle of the western wall. But after that, when the title of king was split and the Beiliang fought Beimeng, there were more separation of life and fewer deaths. Until he, Su Fengyin, carried the Su family flag and faced the million soldiers of Beimeng again. Chapter 1099. The Chu Yutang that once ran like wolves and rushed like boars were now slave thieves who slaughtered dogs and donkeys. All that was left of the majestic spring and autumn period was sadness and laughter. It was rumored that Huang Longshi, the main culprit behind the sinking of the divine land, only laughed out loud after seeing the miserable scenes of the scholars running north. He made a few songs to gloat over their misfortune for the future generations to hum. He claimed that not only did the Wulin world have to thank him for reversing fate, the literary world had changed like this because the country was unlucky and the poets were lucky. When the spring and autumn period ended, the scholars ran north. There was only one record of Yonghui crossing north in the official history of Liang. Jia Mian praised him generously with beautiful words and praised him for being able to pass through Guangling. However, in the history books of Beimeng there were only 2 times. Other than the simple Yonghui crossing north, there were more records of the second crossing north before Su Xiao became the vassal of Beiliang. This time, the scholars and celebrities of the Central Plains who were completely disappointed with the Liang imperial court began to crazily rush into Beimeng, which was now the territory of the Southern Dynasty. Most of the so-called powerful families that occupied the high positions of the Southern Dynasty now fled north in panic like stray dogs. At that time, these big families spared no effort to secretly operate in Tai and city, hoping that the relatively gentle Gu Jiantang would be crowned as the king of Beiliang instead of the executioner with the surname Su. They believed that who would be crowned as the king of Beiliang would decide whether the national policy of Liang would be strict or lenient. However, the result was disappointing. The lame man wanted to be the king of Beiliang instead of an ordinary border official and personally guard the northwest gate of the empire. In this way, they hoped that before the gate was completely closed, they would be able to leave some incense for their descendants in the upcoming revenge by the Liang imperial court. Even if they had to bear the infamy of relying on the northern barbarians to prolong their feeble existence, they didn't care. For them, who were easily the 3 dukes of 4 generations, changing the surname of a country was never a disaster. Therefore, the destruction of the country was a small matter, but the destruction of the family was a big matter. The noble families lost their old roots one after another. Not to mention anything else, just the ancestral maps of their family tree that had been treasured for hundreds of years were scattered all over the ground during their escape to the north. In the spring rain, a young man squatted by the roadside. He could neither pick up nor flip open those precious diagrams, so he could only look at the page of genealogy that was spread open. The person who wrote the genealogy was obviously a calligraphy master. The handwriting was elegant and did not lose its strength. The words written on the genealogy archive were like pearls. With just a few strokes, he could write down the full picture of the achievements of a certain family ancestor. Then a tired mule carrying 4 gold-lacquered chests trampled over it and crushed the entire manuscript. It sank deep into the mud and the words blurred. The young man stood up. In his eyes, there was an endless stream of people, clan after clan, surname after surname, rushing together from the south to the north. He gently retracted his gaze and saw one of the chests carried by the mule fall to the ground with a loud crash after the rope broke, splashing a lot of mud. The mule driver completely ignored it and only whipped the mule. It was not because he felt sorry for the only ancient book in the chest that had been bought with a lot of money by generations of people, but because the mule's hooves were too slow. After the panicked caravan of horses and mules, the caravan behind them was much more orderly. There were no lowly animals like mules and donkeys. They were all tall horses that were very flashy but not practical in their escape to the north. The caravan was also particularly long, with no less than 400 people. The people riding on the horses, whether old or young, were not as anxious as the caravan behind them. There were even many white-clothed children whose clothes were slightly wet from the spring rain behind the curtains of some of the carriages. There were both men and women. They did not need to hold books in their hands to recite poems and chapters silently. An old man who looked like a teacher in a clan school sat among the children. He closed his eyes and concentrated. Occasionally he would speak with the students. Su Fengnian, who was dreaming of spring and autumn, did not follow the caravan forward. He stayed where he was until he heard the words, "The woman admires chastity, the man is talented, adhere to elegant exercises, good nobility," and finally, "The tall crown accompanies the chariot, driving away the mules and vibrating the tassels." Only then did the sound of recitation gradually dissipate in his ears. The old teacher, who had been silent all this time, only recited once during this period, and could not hide the tears in the old man's eyes. "Be righteous and retire, the bandits suffer losses," Su Fengnian thought to himself. They were not the stray dogs that were despised in the history books of later generations. They were probably the ones who were truly in the north. They should return home one day to worship their ancestors. However, that teacher would definitely not see the willows, moss and fireflies of his hometown for the rest of his life. Suddenly, an old Confucian scholar who had no one to rely on walked out from the crowd and stared at Su Fengnian. Presumably, in the eyes of the living in the world of the living, the old Confucian scholar had long been accustomed to the old Confucian scholar's foolish behavior. Along the way to the north, there were too many old people who died of illness, anger, or drowned. The old Confucian scholar with the spring rain on his head twirled his beard and smiled. "I finally see you. You've already predicted this?" Su Fengnian opened his mouth out of habit. Although he was speechless, since this old Confucian scholar who would gift him a steamed bun in the future could see him, he should be able to see him speak. The old Confucian scholar who looked like a lunatic talking to himself nodded and smiled. "I've said it before, oh no, I'll say it to you one day in the Tuma Pass. I Yuan Qingshan, am not considered heaven and earth in this life, but only a human. The dream that Zhao Shituan bestowed upon your younger brother, Su Longxiang, is a long night road, and that steamed bun can be considered a lantern that points the way." Yuan Qingshan smiled and said, "Two dynasties destroyed Buddhism, and only Bailiang sincerely believes in Buddhism. Since you're willing to shoulder the heavy burden, then you should receive Lu Songtao's fate, and thus build the lantern's skeleton. Therefore that bowl of blood from the dragon tree monk should also light the wick in the cage. It's a pity that I haven't seen the other two of you with my own eyes." Su Fengnian asked, "Aren't you worried that Beimang will be destroyed by Li Yang?" Yuan Qingshan shook his head and said indifferently, "Dynasties can rise and fall, but noble spirit must exist forever." Chapter 1100. Su Fengnian looked up at the gray sky and said softly, "This me has already seen Qi Xuanzhen slaying demons on the demon-slaying platform with his own eyes." Li Chungang entered Western Shu with a sword, his sword aura rolling along the dragon wall. The sword emperor of Western Shu guarded the gate for the emperor until the sword was destroyed and he died, trampled into meat paste by horse hooves. Dong Tai rode a donkey into Jianghu. Wang Mingyang, the general of Xiangfan, committed suicide after the city was breached. He died holding an old jar with the bones of his wife and children in it. He once used this jar as a cooking utensil. I've seen many people, but I've never found what I should be looking for. Yuan Qingshan talked about the mysteries of heaven but did not reveal them. 3 people at once dream of spring and autumn, each of them has their own search. It's none other than the roots of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The latter 2 are naturally close to you. Actually, you don't need to look for them. They've already found you. You only need the other 2 to come back to their senses. You don't have to worry too much. As for the noble spirit of Confucianism, if you deliberately look for it, you probably won't find it. Even if you look for Chao Dei, Chao Qingyi, Zhang Julu, Grand Secretary Zhang Baiyan, I fear that even if you search through the entire spring and autumn period, you will still find nothing. Su Fengyin sighed. Then how can I block the way? Yuan Qingshan closed his eyes and pinched his fingers. After opening his eyes, he said slowly, I'm not a real deity after all. I'm destined to not be able to predict what will happen after I ascend. However, at this time and place, no matter how hard I try to predict, you can't stop Wang Xinji. Su Fengyin did not show any anxiety. Yuan Qingshan stared at the image of this Su Fengyin, and pinched his fingers quickly. His expression was uncertain. Strange. Why is it that the more I predict, the more you'll die? If that's the case, why will I exchange buns with you in the future? The Beimang imperial preceptor in Confucian attire fell into deep thought. After a long time, he raised his head and said, This may be one of the heavenly axioms. I can't predict some people and some things. I can't talk too much with you. I have to escort these scholars into Beimang. Su Fengyin, take care of yourself. Su Fengyin nodded. Su Fengyin stayed where he was the whole time, standing at the bottom of the caravan on the muddy road. Only then did he follow them and see them off from the border of Yuzhou to the north. Then Su Fengyin involuntarily closed his eyes. He had closed his eyes many times after entering this black and white spring and autumn. Every time he opened and closed his eyes, it was like a dream. He could never guess when and where he would appear the next time he opened his eyes, let alone who he would see. After that, he opened and closed his eyes several times. Su Fengyin saw the entire process of building the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. He also knew why the old man with the sheepskin fur coat was suppressed here by the pavilion. It turned out that this was the ruins of Fengdu, the hometown of one of the 4 great grandmasters, the Green Robe of Fengdu. Later generations all thought that the most secretive sect at that time, Fengdu, would definitely be an underground city filled with ghastly aura. They never thought that the female grandmaster would choose a green lake and green mountain and name it Fengdu. Maybe it was just to say that a person with a dead heart lived in a place with a dead heart. Maybe there was no reason, but the woman fell in love with the green bead in the yellow sand of the desert and liked the same color as her clothes. The one-armed, swordless old man occupied the mountain by himself and repelled the new prince of Beiliang, Su Zhao's hundreds of elite riders. Later on, Su Zhao carried wine up the mountain by himself several times. They were all good wine from the central plains that was hard to buy with money in the poor land of Beiliang. He would sit by the old man's side and talk about things that he usually couldn't say out loud. There were a few times when he was completely drunk and passed out beside the old man. He was still drunk and had to be supported down the mountain by Li Yishan. Finally, one day the old man with the sheepskin fur coat took a new pot of wine from Su Zhao's hands. For the first time he asked the Grand King of Beiliang about this wine. Su Zhao said bluntly that this nameless, inferior wine was far inferior to the good wine of the past, but it was cheap. Not only was it enjoyable to drink, it was also very intoxicating. That was enough. The old man took a sip and said that this wine was actually called Green Ant. In the past, people urged him to drink it, but he also disliked the inferior quality of this wine. Later on, his second sister wrote a poem and the Green Ant wine became known outside of Beiliang for the first time. It was also popular in the court of Liyang. This should be the origin of this wine. Later on, he closed his eyes and opened them again. During this time, he saw the 2 girls who came to Wutong'an on Mount Qingliang for the first time. One of them was still called Red Musk, while the other was still Blue Bird. However, she had an additional surname, Wang Blue Bird. However, at that time, the 2 girls' temperaments were completely different. Red Musk had a strong Beimang aura and her eyes were as cold as knives. She was hostile to everyone she met, even the young master of Beiliang, His Royal Highness Su Fengyin, was no exception. Blue Bird was the complete opposite. Her father was the youngest of the 4 grandmasters, the Immortal of Spear who died the latest. Wang Xiu had a daughter in his later years and doted on her very much. When she came to the mountain for the first time, she did not appear in the world as a maid but as a guest. At that time, Wang Xiu's junior martial brother Lu Yanbing, who had not changed his surname, brought the girl into the palace. However, she did not meet the young Su Fengyin. Later on, Chen Zhibao committed treason and murdered his own master. Lu Yanbing had once single-handedly challenged the king of Beiliang, who had 500 cavalry escorts. In the end, he was stopped by Jian Zhihuang after 8 strikes. Su Xiao, who had always been very rude to the martial artists of Jianghu, allowed this martial arts genius to leave and gave him 3 chances to take revenge. After using up all 3 chances, Lu Yanbing did not manage to kill Su Xiao, nor did he manage to kill Chen Zhibao, who was at the peak of his power at the border. He had become friends with Jianghu Huang, who had been a coachman for a few years. They met for a drink and Liu Yambing found out that the old swordsman with missing front teeth who was his natal yellow formation map was actually the junior martial brother of the Sword Emperor of Shishu. At first he had come to Bailiang to take revenge, but later on, after many killings, he no longer had that hatred. Liu Yambing casually said, "The emperor and his minister died at the gates of the country, while the swordsman died in Jianghu. The Sword Emperor of Shishu, both of them died for a reason." Old Huang smiled and replied, "That's true, but I can't say such things." Old Huang also said that he quite liked the young highness and would not dislike the smell of horse urine on him. When he looked at people, he was indeed looking at people. He was not like the many aristocrats and princes he had seen in Jianghu, who only looked at people who were well matched in terms of social status and looked at others like dogs. Of course, the most important thing was that whenever this kid went to the stables to take a horse, he would secretly bring a pot of wine for the coachman. He was very happy to see him drink. Old Huang said that this kid always talked about how fun Jianghu was. The coachman said that if there was a chance in the future, he would definitely take him to the real Jianghu. This kid would definitely be disappointed. At this point, Old Huang, who was missing front teeth, could not stop smiling. He accidentally spilled a lot of yellow wine from his mouth. Not long after, Bluebird stopped using that surname. Liu Yambing also changed his surname to Su and became the old Prince Liang's personal guard. For some reason, this Su Fengyan knew that this was the last time he opened his eyes and wandered around the world. He stood near the straw mat that covered the corpse of a young girl and could only watch as she was mocked and beaten. Then he saw His Royal Highness, who was his younger self. Chapter 1101. Sitting in the carriage was the most expensive courtesan in the city at the time. Just meeting her would cost 500 taels of silver. Even if he was the son of the king of Bailiang, he would still have to pay just to hear some interesting Jianghu stories from her. Although Su Fengyan had a photographic memory, his memory of the scene in front of him was still very blurry. Thus, even when he received spiced beef from the little girl many times in the future, even when he was later pursued by a young female assassin, he did not recognize that she was the child he had casually given a pearl hairpin to back then. In troubled times, human life was as cheap as grass. Every year had its ups and downs. Who would pay attention to the careless act of kindness he had done in his youth? At the time, His Royal Highness was thinking more about how to guard against assassinations outside the manor, how to practice martial arts for revenge, and how to deal with his master, Li Yishan's heavy schoolwork. There were too many things he could not handle. If it was said that many children of noble families could still have some leisure time, even if they did not know the taste of worry, they could still create new words to express their worry. But his entire youth was always a hazy and gloomy impression. He held grudges and was ignorant. He would insensibly take out his anger on Su Xiao, who had the two titles of King of Bailiang and the Pillar of Bailiang, but he did not do anything and was unwilling to take revenge. Thus, at the time, Su Fengyan was very disgusted with his identity as the heir. Even Su Xiao, a vassal king with 300,000 cavalry, could not take revenge. Even if he inherited the title of King of Bailiang, what could he do? The youth wanted to practice martial arts, the blade, and become a top ace. Then he would go to Great Peace City to find the emperor sitting on the dragon throne. Su Fengyan came to the head of a new grave. After the Su family retainer who had secretly escorted the little girl left, he saw an unexpected but reasonable middle-aged man. Huang Xianxia. The leader of the three great devils of spring and autumn, Huang Longshi. The man who had traveled around Bailiang to plant spies had been carefully observing the young His Highness during this period of time. He appeared beside the little girl who was kneeling in front of the grave and didn't get up. He crouched down and picked up a piece of yellow soil. Very quickly he skillfully molded a small clay figurine. He handed it to the little girl and asked, "Does it look like him?" When the little girl heard the noise, she didn't take the clay figurine. Instead, she knelt and took a few steps back, her eyes cold. He pinched the clay figurine with 2 fingers, raised his arm and continued to ask, "Do they look alike?" The little girl, whose shoes were torn and her clothes were torn and her hands and feet were full of frostbite, was stunned for a moment. She stared at the clay figurine with her eyes wide open. She snatched it and carefully held it in her arms. Finally she burst into tears. The middle-aged man sat on the ground and smiled softly. "The clay figurine looks like your mother, but you look like my daughter. I'm very happy to meet you. This makes me happier than any book person I've found in this spring and autumn." The little girl only cared about her heart-wrenching sobs. He didn't care. His eyes were abnormally gentle, like a father who was on the verge of despair and found his long-lost daughter in a foreign land thousands of miles away. He continued, "My name is Huang Longshi. I've monopolized the spring and autumn 3 grades here. From now on you'll be called Jia. You were born in the spring and autumn 3 grades, so you'll have the same surname as the spring and autumn 13 grades. However, you share the same name with someone who lived a long time ago." The little girl stopped crying, but she still didn't dare to approach this strange man. However, she knew that he didn't have any bad intentions, because she didn't hate him from the bottom of her heart. Huang Longshi sat in the soil in front of the grave. "I'll teach you martial arts in the future. The young man you want to repay is also a book person. However, he will die before the age of 30. The official and unofficial history records many strange ways of dying. Anyway, they're all curses. The best and worst way is that he died under the iron hooves of Beimang and died without an intact corpse. I think that if he can die by your hands in the future, it'll be a very good way to repay you." Huang Longshi looked at her young face, which didn't understand much but was full of sadness. His heart suddenly softened. He said softly, "Since the person who flipped through the book inexplicably came into the book and wasn't crushed to death by the pages, then things in the future might be different." Huang Longshi stood up and smiled as he extended his hand to her. The little girl stood up with him holding her hand. Then she looked at the field of golden sunflowers in the distance, lost in thought. Huang Longshi turned his head and looked at the small grave made of new soil. He sighed. He didn't need to think to know that the grave would be dug up again and again by greedy people who didn't respect ghosts and gods just to take away the beaded golden hairpin. However, he didn't tell her this. The little girl suddenly ran to the field of golden sunflowers. She broke off 2 stalks and placed one in front of the grave. Then she thought for a moment and put down the other stalk that she planned to carry on her shoulder and put it beside her feet. She knelt on the ground, facing the distance, and kowtowed 3 times. Su Fengyin, who happened to be standing where the little girl was kowtowing, gently turned his body. The 1,000-character classic of the 300,000 elementary studies opened with the grand 8 characters, Heaven and Earth black and yellow, Universe primitive and desolate. The universe was then analyzed into the 8 characters, up and down, for directions since ancient times. The Taoist master Zhao Shituan's dream of the spring and autumn annals originated from an ancient person who had achieved the Tao in ancient times. This was the essence of the later generations' astral travel. At this moment, this Su Fengyin raised his head and looked into the distance with Huang Longshi, who was now only 40 years old. On the top of Little Lotus Peak, the new Prince Liang, who had never obstructed his physical body from walking and thinking even after 10 astral travels, now looked like a half-dead person who had fallen into a deep sleep. Wudong Song Jiming, Qin Yi, and Yu Xingrui, who were of the same generation as the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, took turns guarding outside the pass for Su Fengyin. Chapter 1102. Handsome falcons constantly landed on the tortoise's back, delivering intelligence reports. The second report came late, because after the peachwood sword flew up the mountain, Song Jiming, who was guarding the pass at the time, knew the outcome. Chen Yao and Yu Xingrui rushed over after hearing the news, but they were both silent. Yu Xingrui's temperament was the most natural among his fellow apprentices, apart from his younger apprentice brother Hong Shixiang. The old man leaned against the stone tortoise's foot and raised his head, not daring to look at the hovering flying sword. Chen Yao, who was even older than the current Wudong sect leader's master, sat beside his younger apprentice brother and said softly, "This can be considered a happy funeral. Don't let younger apprentice brother Wang leave uneasy." Yu Xingrui nodded woodenly and said, "The sect leader is gone. Younger apprentice brother is gone. Younger apprentice brother Wang is gone. Elder apprentice brother Song also said he would be gone soon. It's only been a few years, but the 6 of us," Chen Yao laughed. "But they left without any regrets. Think about it, Jade Axe was brought up the mountain by you and so many other juniors also went up the mountain. In the future, there will be new generations of people coming up the mountain. Sometimes when I look at those young faces, even a rigid old antique like me can't help but want to laugh." Yu Xingrui sighed and said in a muffled voice, "I'm not as open-minded as you." Chen Yao joked, "Your disciple is stronger than you." Yu Xingrui said in a low voice, "If he dares not take back younger apprentice brother, he can continue to be the sect leader. I don't recognize him as my disciple anyway." Chen Yao said angrily, "Are you still being reasonable? I'm in charge of the discipline. You want to be beaten at your age?" Yu Xingrui suddenly laughed and rubbed his cheeks. He sighed and said, "When we were young, it was Uncle Peng who was in charge of the discipline on the mountain. I always liked to go against Uncle Peng. When he was angry, he always said that if he had the ability to be the sect leader, he wouldn't care about me. I never thought that Jade Axe would become the sect leader. I have no regrets now. Qinyao said worriedly, it's not good to stop them one by one. Yu Xingrui, who had been in Jianghu for the longest time, shook his head and said, it can't be helped. Among the top 10 masters of the world, except for the recent kidnapping of Gao Shulu, the devil Luo Yang and the broken spear Deng Mao, when have I heard of any other two fighting side by side? Moreover, this time Dong Tai was on Wang Xinji's side. Even if Chao Changqing wanted to interfere, De Chu had already restored his country and would not leave Guangling Road. Taking a step back, even if someone was willing to join forces with Little Ping, would our junior brother be willing? Taking a step back, if he was really willing, he probably wouldn't be able to use that final sword strike. Taking a step back, blocking Wang Xinji is not stalling for time. Wang Xinji's walking speed is not slow, but it is definitely not fast. The people blocking her are all using their own methods to find flaws. Qinyao said helplessly, if only junior brother were here. In this kind of battle, one person is more useful than 300,000 cavalry. Yu Xingrui thought for a moment and said, it's better to rely on yourself than on others. Only those who cherish their own good fortune will come here. Qinyao said no more. The two sat on the other side of the turtle hunchback and suddenly heard their senior brother Song Jiming cry out in surprise. The two old men stood up to take a look and were finally relieved. They looked at each other and smiled. One of the Su Fengyin came back to his senses, but did not return to his body. He stood near the peachwood sword and lightly bowed to the three Wudong Jinren. A month later, the moon shone on the summit of Kongzhao Peak. Qinyao waited for the return of the second Su Fengyin. In front of him, there was a nimble ball of purple gold qi that surrounded this Su Fengyin leisurely. The Su Fengyin lay on his side at the edge of the cliff, one hand propping up his head and facing the outside of the mountain. Sleeping in the spring and autumn, sleeping in the spring and autumn, the stone root lies high and forgets the year. Not sleeping on a blanket, not covered with a blanket, heaven and earth as the bed, covered with a bright moon. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed, Mount Tai destroyed, the ocean 10,000 feet high fell from the sky, black dragons screamed and frightened ghosts and gods. I was sleeping so soundly, eyes to nose to life, heart to heart. Continuous breathing, silently holding on, the void is extremely quiet. Essential Qi floating Dan pool, inside the divine water ring 5. Call Jiating, summon the spirits, my god is out of the 9 palaces roaming the green and blue. Watching the sea in a dream, yin and yang are mentioned in the smoke. I don't know how many years have passed outside of the spring and autumn. This person who forgot his worries. Truly he could sit back and relax. There were already 3 Su Fengyin on the mountain, sitting, lying or standing. Only the last one was left. In the early morning, the sitting Su Fengyin began to feel as if he was struck by lightning, as if he was trying to wake up. Qinyao was shocked. Even if the old man did not know the mystery of the spring and autumn dream, he should know that this was not good news. Logically speaking, the latest spy report said that Wang Xinji was still in Hezhou and had not entered the Beiliang Road. Even if the Su Fengyin calculated something, at the very least Su Yanbing could resist for a while. The new Prince Liang should not be so impatient. Could it be that he had encountered an irresistible setback in his dream? Qinyao did not dare to speak. He could only resign himself to fate. Finally the Su Fengyin opened his eyes. After a moment of thought, he murmured, I can't wait any longer. For the time being, the Su Fengyin only had the body of Gao Shulu and did not have the complete soul. He turned to Qinyao and said guiltily, these years I owe Wudong too much. Qinyao took a deep breath and said slowly, without Jinwu there would be no Wudong. Then Qinyao could not help but ask in a low voice, why did you wake up so early? The Su Fengyin smiled and shook his head, not giving an answer. The Su Fengyin walked more than 100 feet into the cliff, turned around and began to sprint. The other 2 Su Fengyin opened up a path to the summit. The Su Fengyin leaped out of the lotus peak. He crashed into the sea of clouds. He fell to the foot of the mountain. With a loud sound like a mountain hitting the sky, even Qinyao, who was standing on the summit, felt the whole mountain shake. Qinyao suddenly felt uneasy. This was a bell that sounded like a death knell. The Su Fengyin bent his knees and landed on the ground, creating a large hole at the foot of the mountain that was several people high. After jumping out of the hole, he continued to run toward the Beiliang border. In a person's life, there would always be a moment when there was no need to reason. It would give birth to a thought. Death is death. Chapter 1103. Huishan Purple Robe and Wudong Sword Maniac had blocked Wang Xinji's path one after another. The 2 battles had caused great waves in Jianghu. Outside the gorge, the section of Guangling River where the Iron Lock Sinks River was located was still as calm as ever. However, there was an endless stream of Wulin people who came to see the remains. Not only was there the coffin created by the Wulin Alliance master Xianyuan Qingfeng, but there was also old monster Wang's moving mountain. Groups of Jianghu people came and went. Most of them regretted not being able to see Wang Xiaoping's earth fairy sword before her death, as well as that graceful figure in Huishan purple robe. No one knew that somewhere in the lower reaches of Guangling River, a nameless old Taoist from Longhu Mountain had been waiting for a long time. Although he only had the appearance of a middle-aged man, there was always an indescribable sense of lethargy. Taoist Zhao squatted by the riverside and reached out to scoop up a handful of water. He was somewhat emotional. 400 years ago, Gao Shulu had once said that she could suck up all the water in Guangling in one gulp. It was originally a metaphor to smoothly comprehend all methods in one go. Now, it had long changed beyond recognition. It was only used to mock someone once and for all. In 400 years, words of praise had become words of derision. The Taoist who had long since abandoned his real name looked at the blurry face in the water and gently blew a breath. The turbid river water in his palm rippled slightly. After a moment, it was as clear and stable as a mirror, reflecting a touch of purple. A person's life was but 100 years. Things remained the same but people changed. The old man who only existed in the genealogy of Emperor Zhao sighed. He threw up the water mirror in his hand and bent 2 fingers. From the mirror, he pinched the corner of the purple robe. As the Taoist made this move, a woman slowly floated up from the surface of the Guangling River. This was undoubtedly the extremely obscure and profound move of the Finger Mystery Realm, fishing the moon in the water. The woman was no longer curled up like a fetus. She sat cross-legged in the river, but her eyes were still closed. During this period of time she was like a stone cow sinking into the river. Not only did she not retreat downstream due to the impact of the river, but she also moved upstream towards the mouth of the gorge. However, as a new qi lingered around her body, she began to flow down with the water. In the end, she was fished out by the old Taoist who had been lonely for 100 years. In the past 100 years, the old Taoist did not have a good reputation. What he did was also like a grass snake. He hid in silence and was very meticulous. This was where the Tao of solitary seclusion lay. The evil dragon was raised in the Earth Lung Mountain to absorb the fate of the Zhao family in the Dragon Tiger Mountain and nourish the dragon's main family in the Great Peace City. The old locust tree was transplanted in the lower Maui post house to suppress the evil spirits of the Su family and his son. He made a bet with the old fellow from the Taoist master's mansion, Zhao Xuansu, to trade a seal for a seal. However, he, Zhao Huangchao, lived in seclusion in the Dragon Tiger Mountain adjacent to Mount Hui. He befriended the father and son, Xianyuan Dandan and Xianyuan Jingqing, who were polar opposites. It seemed to be a coincidence, but was there no secret? However, this kind of behavior never interfered with his great undertaking of 100 years. It was like a kind of leisure and elegant decoration, like a hermit who planted a plum tree in the courtyard. It was good that the flower bloomed, but it did not matter if it did not. Zhao Huangchao looked at the young woman who slowly stood up on the water. As she grew older, she became more and more similar. However, for some reason, some of the similarities became thinner. It was no wonder that Lu Songtao had chosen the latter instead of her at the last moment. Xianyuan Qingfeng opened his eyes. He was wary of this Taoist whose depth he could not see. Zhao Huangchao smiled and said, "You don't have to be like this. There are many legacies left for you on the Great Snow Plateau. For example, the wedding dress that Xianyuan Dandan did not have time to enjoy, and the pill of reassurance that your father left for you to control your servants. They were all made by me." Xianyuan Qingfeng was skeptical. He sneered and said, "Oh? So you are the benefactor of the Great Snow Plateau, aren't you? You want me as a junior to repay the debt of my ancestors?" Zhao Huangchao smiled and shook his head. Not only was she not like her, she was simply not like her at all. Back then, that woman viewed the affairs of the world as either black or white. How could she be so calculative? That's right. If she was still that ignorant woman back then, how could she force herself to become a boneless person? She would also not be able to become the clever Huishan clan master and the vicious and merciless Wulin alliance chief. Zhao Huangchao raised his hand as if he wanted to brush away the morning fog on the river. His tone was cold. He said, "I was on good terms with the 2 generations of Mount Hui in the past because I thought highly of Xianyuan Dandan's ambition and Xianyuan Jingqing's sincerity. However, they did not succeed. My unnecessary efforts were wasted. I have no complaints." Xianyuan Qingfeng asked, "Then why are you looking for me?" Zhao Huangchao smiled and asked, "Xianyuan Qingfeng, do you want to reconstruct your muscles and bones to build a real bodhisattva golden body and then cross over to celestial phenomenon?" You should know that Wang Xinji gave up Martial Emperor City. It seemed that she did not leave any of her disciples behind, but in fact she left a backup plan in Jianghu. If you want to be a true leader of Jianghu and not a leader of Wulin in name only, it is very difficult to avoid me. If you think I am a frog at the bottom of a well and talk too big, then let me put it another way. I can help you walk faster on the path of martial arts and avoid many detours. Xianyuan Qingfeng did not even try to hide her disdain. Zhao Huangchao had cultivated his body and qi for 2 or even 3 lifetimes as long as an ordinary person. Naturally, he would not get angry because of this. He said calmly, "Just now I thought of half a sentence, which is to let people fight for their dignity. Xianyuan Qingfeng, since you have reached celestial phenomenon, do you have any comprehension?" Although Xianyuan Qingfeng did not trust this pretentious Taoist, she did not have the slightest intention of looking down on him. After a moment of hesitation, she shook her sleeves and sat down on the ground. Almost at the same time, Zhao Huangchao also sat down on the ground. The two looked at each other as equals. Xianyuan Qingfeng said in a deep voice, "Let's fight for our dignity. First, we have to fight for our own destiny. What we nurture is qi dynamic. Then, we have to fight for the destiny of the world to achieve momentum. Everything is in a gradual process. Then, at a certain time and place, we will succeed in one step like a carp swimming thousands of miles, and finally leaping over the dragon gate." Zhao Huangchao nodded with a look of admiration. Destiny, qi dynamic, luck, and momentum are all within the scope of one's qi. Below Earth immortals, or to be precise, below celestials, no one is exempt from this. Xianyuan Qingfeng, although you are walking on the path of martial arts in the eyes of the 3 sects, you have already reached a higher level. Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered and said, "Taoist, you came to find me today to talk about principles? Our meeting is not a Buddhist debate that happens once every 10 years on the evil-slaying platform." Zhao Huangchao was still calm and did not pretend to be an expert. He folded his hands on his knees and said with a smile, "How about we make a deal?" Xianyuan Qingfeng lowered his head and bent his waist. He put his hand into the water and rolled up his sleeve with his other hand, revealing a transparent wrist with blood and blue veins but no bones. Zhao Huangchao laughed loudly and said, "It's fine if you don't do it. When you understand, and if this Taoist is still alive at that time, it will still be effective. Just come to Mount Longhu and call me." This Taoist's original name is Zhao Huangchao. Xianyuan Qingfeng nodded and remained silent. Chapter 1104. Zhao Huangchao stood up and disappeared in a flash. His laughter was heard. 9 out of 10 countries are broken and 8 out of 10 people are dead. If I become Emperor Qing in the future, I will wait until the 8th day of the 9th lunar month on Mount Fuyao to pick osmanthus seeds. Xianyuan Qingfeng showed a solemn expression. The wedding dress and soothing pill were both secret legacies of the old Hui mountain. The former was used by Xianyuan Pan as a human ladder. Otherwise, Xianyuan Qingfeng would not have the great celestial cultivation he had when he fought Wang Xinji, even if he killed many experts to absorb their inner strength. The latter was a mysterious goo medicine to prevent people from being untrustworthy after using both kindness and power. This Taoist called Zhao Huangchao should be telling the truth. He was indeed an old acquaintance of Bulldugong. However, after Xianyuan Qingfeng took control of Hui Mountain, he did not trust anyone except himself. He hated the Taoists of Dragon Tiger Mountain even more. How could he easily do business with a nameless Taoist who appeared out of nowhere? Xianyuan Qingfeng withdrew his hand. He didn't even need to shake his wrist to avoid touching a drop of water. After standing up, he looked around. His gaze finally stopped, intentionally or otherwise, on a fallen reed. With a tap of his foot, he stepped on the reed. He seemed to have understood something. Dressed in purple, he returned to Jianghu and followed Shui Donglu. On the road of Hezhou, a huge creature was rampaging. Most of the traveling merchants only saw a blur in front of their eyes. Then they only saw a cloud of dust and could not see clearly what it was. Some of the Jianghu experts with good eyesight recognized that the huge creature was an unusually tall and sturdy living person. It was like a remnant of the ancient desolate man hidden in Kunlun Mountain. It was 20 feet tall and had the strength to uproot mountains and rivers. 5,000 years ago, the saint controlled the flood. After he succeeded, he ordered 900 Kunlun giants to carry 9 cauldrons to suppress Jiuzhou. This giant's hands and feet touched the ground. It ran like thunder and its legs were much stronger than the famous horses outside the Great Wall. A gray-haired old man sat on it. A rope was tied around his waist to prevent him from falling. The old devil head, who had wreaked havoc in the 9 countries during the spring and autumn period, should have continued to wag his tongue during the restoration of the West Chu state, but right at the critical moment when the new Chu state was about to rise up in rebellion, Unexpectedly the old man abandoned him and summoned slaves who were far more worthy of their name than the Kunlun slaves of Tibing Mountain, who rushed to the Bailiang border. The old man's journey was bumpy. Other than having to stop to eat and rest, he didn't waste any time and didn't say a single word. However, when he approached Bailiang Road, he began to mumble to himself from time to time. "Old Master Wang, you started fighting too early. If I had known, I would have let you destroy the city and die before you were ready. This old man has helped you to make the Jianghu so interesting. It's fine if you Wang Xinji don't appreciate it. It's fine if you don't like that brat surnamed Su, but why do you have to implicate a little girl? Wang Xinji, Su Fengnian, both of you deserve to die. If my daughter dies, Wang Xinji, you can forget about guarding the heavenly gate, and Bailiang can forget about having a moment of peace. Especially you, Su Fengnian. So what if you can't defeat Wang Xinji? Just kowtow and beg for mercy. Wang Xinji saw how useless you are and naturally disdained to fight with you. Why do you have to recklessly occupy Gao Shulu's body and spirit? Are you afraid that Gao Shulu will kill Chao Changqing, and the girl you like will have no one to rely on? You can't even care about Bailiang's safety, and you still dare to hope to protect Jiangxi's life? Fine, consider yourself sentimental. However, if you favor one and discriminate against the other, and watch as my daughter dies, I, Huang Longshi, did harm to Bailiang in the past, but I also left a way out for Bailiang. In the future, just wait for you, little brat, to die without a complete corpse, just like what's written in the books. The Kunlun giant had already rushed into Hezhou, rushing straight to the border between Yuzhou and Hezhou. Huang Longshi's heart began to sink more and more, because no matter what he saw, the brat had not achieved perfection. The root of it was the dream of a nameless Taoist 400 years ago, and it was indispensable. Moreover, in the old man's calculation, the brat was cautious by nature, but he also considered the overall situation. Now that there was a heavy burden on his shoulders, how could he risk his life for a girl who was extremely thin on both sides? Putting himself in Huang Longshi's shoes, not to mention that he was the most cold-blooded person in the spring and autumn period, even ordinary people would never act so rashly. Because if he made a move at this time, he would lose his cultivation, his family business, and the state's affairs. It would not be an exaggeration to call him a sinner for 1,000 years. Su Fengnian, watching from the sidelines, was the right thing to do. Huang Longshi had been living a good life for so many years. No matter how many setbacks he had suffered, he had never been so helpless. The giant under him was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Huang Longshi was still cold-blooded and said, "It's time for you to die." The giant did not complain. Even if it was bleeding from its 7 orifices, it still had to run the last 300 miles. After 300 miles, Huang Longshan, who had been holding his breath all the way, began to charge forward on foot, and then tried his best to catch up before Wang Xinji killed. The premise was that the silly girl was not dead yet. Huang Longshi had a sentence that he did not say to the girl. If he had not met her, he would have retreated into the mountains and forests after unifying the Central Plains and Liang. He would have focused on martial arts and cultivation and then tried to ascend. He had no love in the human world, so he could go and see the scenery in the sky again. Approaching Yuzhou, Huang Longshan suddenly shouted, "Stop!" The giant hurriedly stopped, and its hands and feet scratched several gullies on the ground. The old man jumped down and rushed forward, faintly ashamed. It's too late. Wang Xinji was a man of his word, even if his opponent was a little girl and a very innovative killer. Since he had said that the next time they met, he would kill her. So when she stood in the middle of the courier road at the border without hesitation, Wang Xinji really did step forward and stomped on the belly of the short girl. She fell backward, her body sliding back dozens of feet. There was no longer any chi in her body. The clothes on her back were in tatters and she was covered in wounds. She should not have been able to stand up and would have died lying down, but she probably relied on her last breath to stand up shakily. After she stood up, she still did not show the slightest fear. She had killed Wang Mingyin, Lu Haosher, and many other masters. She was not afraid of killing people, nor was she afraid of being killed. She was just a little unhappy and felt that she had not done enough. She had returned the hairpin. But she had not returned the mink hat he later gave her. Her vision had long been blurred, but she still raised her head. There was once when she was hunted down by a willow and a fat woman. She could not hold on that time, and then he fell from the sky and landed in front of her. She was very happy. She was not happy that she could live, but happy that he had come. It was that simple. The girl closed her eyes. Old Huang said that when people died, they would sleep for a long time, where no one could wake them up. She felt that it was quite good, so she fell asleep. At this time she did not know if it was an illusion, but a warm hand gently pressed on her head, and a soft voice said, "You are not allowed to sleep in." Half asleep, she felt the person behind her walk to her side, and said a few words to her and to the very powerful old man. A very soft sentence. "I'm here." A very heavy sentence. As if the whole world had heard it. "Wang Xianji, it's time for you to die." Chapter 1105. Perhaps it was because it had been a long time since Wang Xianji heard the younger generation speak such bold and visionary words in front of him. He still remembered the first time Chao Changqing ascended the tower. He said, "I would like to ask Senior for a few rounds of romance." Dong Tai's words were even sharper. "I have a sword to ask you." As for the other characters, most of them were relatively more respectful and restrained. Occasionally there would be a few arrogant and willful youngsters who spoke arrogant words before ascending the tower, but when they finally reached the top of the martial emperor city with great difficulty and saw him, they had already lost their edge and sharpness. Wang Xianji's contemplation came from afar, but in an instant he looked at Su Fengnian who was right in front of him, and then he looked in the direction of Wudong. He understood in his heart, but he could not tell whether this old man was regretting or mocking him. Wang Xianji did not leave quickly on this trip to Beiliang because he was afraid that Su Fengnian would not even be able to transform Gao Shulu's body and spirit into his own. What was the point of killing an ordinary first-level master? He did not leave slowly because he did not want him to swallow his spirit outside of Beiliang. In Wang Xianji's view, swallowing the fate of Jianghu into his stomach was an action that crossed the line. Wang Xianji nodded toward Su Fengnian, probably indicating that this young vassal king could make arrangements for his funeral. As a 100-year-old man who had suppressed Jianghu for a whole 60 years, he indeed had this little bit of patience. Su Fengnian picked up Miss Hehe and swept past the boundary marker. He did not need to lift a finger. The hairpin, the marten hat, and the sunflower, these three objects, all moved without the wind, following behind the two of them from a distance. Su Fengnian's original intention was to send Jia, who was in his arms, away from the battlefield as far away as possible. This was because he wasn't sure if Wang Xianji could use 90% of her strength or 100% of her strength. Furthermore, if Wang Xianji went all out, how many innocent bystanders would be implicated? Su Fengnian suddenly stopped and saw an unexpected but reasonable old man from afar. As if relieved of a burden, he took the hairpin and other items that floated towards him. When the old man rushed to him, he handed them all to the old man. After that, he did not turn around immediately. Instead, he pressed his 5 fingers on his chest like hooks and forcibly hooked out a cloud of purple gold air. He slowly pressed it into the girl's forehead and said softly, "This is the tribulation that Zhao Xuansu wanted to impose on me back then, and I let her bear it. This time it was scattered by Wang Xianji and scattered everywhere. I took advantage of the time when Wang Xianji was absent-minded to gather some of it. Don't worry, I have tried my best to cleanse it. It will be able to cleanse it for her." Huang Longshi's face was gloomy. He was unforgiving and said angrily, "What's the use of solving the urgent situation? If you die in the hands of Wang Xianji, this old man's daughter will also be buried with you." Su Fengnian lowered his head and looked at the pale and trembling girl. He smiled calmly and said, "If I really lose to Wang Xianji, I will definitely leave behind a bit of cultivation before I die to help her extend her life." Huang Longshi was still unwilling to give up. He asked aggressively, "Tell me first, how long can you extend her life?" Su Fengnian said bitterly, 10 years at most 10 years. This is already my limit." Huang Longshi snorted heavily. Obviously he was very dissatisfied with this answer. Su Fengnian turned around. With his back facing Huang Longshi and the unconscious Hehe, he paused for a moment. It seemed that he wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't say it. He began to move forward. At first he didn't do anything shocking. He took one step at a time. At first his strides were very slow. As he moved from slow to fast, it was filled with a kind of gradual rhythm. This was the method that Lu Hao used to enter and break the city. It almost worked together with Song Yanqing's Earth Immortal sword to successfully injure the white-robed Luo Yang. When Su Fengnian moved faster and farther away, Huang Longshi sat down with his daughter in his arms. He reached out his hand to brush away the bangs on her forehead. The old man gradually restrained his anger. He raised his head and looked in that direction. His face seemed to be moved, surprised, and regretful. Wang Xianji originally thought that she would meet Su Fengnian later. But since he appeared earlier, Wang Xianji wouldn't be so bored as to deliberately avoid a battle. Wang Xianji's hands naturally hung by her sides. But the originally loose linen sleeves were slowly pulled in and stuck to her arms. Wang Xianji didn't occupy any of the 13 ranks of spring and autumn. Even the self-proclaimed second in the world and the recognized first in the world didn't touch the sword or armor. As for the saber, the world praised Gu Jiantang as the first in saber technique. Wang Xianji didn't have any objections. Outside the martial emperor city, however, this didn't mean that Wang Xianji, who smelted the world's martial arts into my furnace, wasn't a master of sword and saber techniques. In fact, Wang Xianji deserved to be called a master of any weapon. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to raise such a talented swordsman like the groom. It was just that the older Wang Xianji was, the less she touched worldly things. Wang Xianji raised her hands and gently clenched them into fists. For the first time she smiled. This time she could finally fight to her heart's content, right? Su Fengnian had borrowed Lu Hao Master's method to enter the city, but not only that, he had supplemented it with Lu Hao Master's staggering sword. This made his silhouette look a little absurd, but at the same time he looked like a drunkard. I have no sword in my hand because I am the sword. On Su Fengnian's path forward, yellow sand constantly surged up from both sides, colliding with each other with a loud bang, and then quickly covering his footsteps. Wang Xianji also began to stride forward. Back and forth, you die and I live. It was that simple. Not just in the Wulin, the entire world began to hear a rumor that was becoming more and more intense. Wang Xianji, who had left the city, was going to kill the new Prince Liang, Su Fengnian. The vast majority of people would find this very satisfying. In any case, many places that prohibited alcohol began to turn a blind eye. Great Peace City. Returning from the flourishing Jiangnan to the imperial palace, Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan would deliver a new item to Crown Princess Yan Dongwu every day. Today he had finally finished delivering. Yan Dongwu stood under the parrot cage and watched her husband make a face. She stretched out her hand and saw that her hands were empty. She smiled sweetly. This crown prince then chatted with his beloved wife about some trivial and interesting news. Even when the purple-clothed woman of Mount Hui had closed the door, Zhao Zhuan did not hide his thoughts about her. Yan Dongwu did not hide anything, nor did she purposely get angry. Instead, she gave him a flirtatious glance. The elegant and handsome man laughed loudly and gently held her wrist. A moment later he let go. He said that he was going out to see old Monster Wang's first disciple, Yu Groom. This swordsman who had left the Eastern Sea for the first time was only passing by the capital and had to continue north. If he missed this chance, he might not have another chance to see him. Zhao Zhuan hurriedly left the room, gradually slowing his steps. He plucked a leaf and twirled it between his fingers. Only those who held power in the imperial palace and Mink Temple knew that the crown prince liked to use leaves to paint. Zhao Zhuan walked between two tall palace walls. He picked up the leaf and used it to block out the blinding sunlight. He smiled and said, "You died so quickly." South Sea. After returning from a visit to Immortals, the Peach Blossom Sword God, who had overturned the sea with his sword, stood on the edge of a cliff on the lone island where the Guanyin sect was located. He raised his eyes and gazed toward the north of the continent. The sword-eating elder Sui Xiegu, who had once exchanged an arm with Li Chungang, stood beside this ordinary-looking sword immortal after his battle with Dong Tai. He asked curiously, "Among the top aces you are close to that kid. Why didn't you go and help him?" Dong Tai shook his head and said, "Wang Xianji did not do anything wrong." The one-armed old man nodded and said, "A Jianghu where a finger-profound realm cultivator can be the most powerful person in the world is indeed unsightly." Chapter 1106. A young and tall woman walked not far from them and asked, "Is that kind of Jianghu really not good?" Dong Tai was not good at and did not like to reason with women. He chuckled and said, "The answer is in their hands. Whoever can stand can decide the direction of Jianghu for the next 100 or 1,000 years. Mount Longhu. After Zhao Ningxin became the most powerful person in the Taoist mansion, Mr. White Lotus Baiyu, who had read too many books, often took this young Taoist surnamed Zhao, who had not experienced many ups and downs in life, down and up the mountain together. The two walked aimlessly to the foot of the mountain and then turned back to climb the mountain. Baiyu's eyes were not good, so he walked slowly and spoke softly. "After going through so many hardships, I was able to lead the Taoist affairs in the world. Now that I've lost half of the country, including the north of Guangling River, to Qingqing King, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Mount Longhu is not high, so it's time to calm down and look back at the scenery. In the past, everyone in the Taoist mansion said that my words were reasonable, but really reasonable words often hurt people. I've been reading and cultivating on this mountain for many years, so I have no place to complain. But now it's all good. 2 generations of heavenly masters ascending together may sound impressive, but the truth is that they're just putting on an act. However, fortune and misfortune come hand in hand. Many people like me who don't share the same surname are able to rise to the top. Zhang Wenhan, Xue Jieshe, and Qin Kuanyong have all truly integrated into Mount Longhu. They're the true worshippers of Mount Longhu. Zhao Ningxin, who was often absent-minded, nodded. Bai Yu continued, you let the Taoist on the mountain learn the set of boxing of Mount Wudong without worry. This is the temperament that a Taoist master should have. We should eat old wheat flour and new corn flour. We can't just eat fine grain, coarse grain is also good for the stomach. Zhao Ningxin nodded and smiled. Fine grain nourishes the mouth, coarse grain nourishes the stomach. There is such a saying outside the mountain. Bai Yu looked at the top of the mountain and said earnestly, Mount Longhu is not high. Look, it's not even as high as our neighbor's bull gang. It's true that the mountain is famous not because of its height, but if we all want to be immortals, it's not right. Zhao Ningxin said, if you want to be an immortal, you must first be a good person. Bai Yu laughed heartily. You're right. Zhao Ningxin stopped and said, I put it down. Bai Yu squinted his eyes out of habit and turned to look at the young Taoist. He felt even more gratified and said, then I can rest assured. Bai Yu stretched out a hand indicating that he could start climbing. Zhao Ningxin hesitated for a moment and continued to climb the stairs. Bai Yu went down the mountain alone. In western Shu there was a sea of bamboo. In the summer, a cool breeze blew gently in the sea of bamboo, as cool as the late autumn season. After Xianxia died in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, the Spring Invitation Cottage was leaderless and had a period of unrest. However, when the new king of Shu entered the place and personally supported an unknown disciple of the Xia family to become the owner of the cottage, it rose to the top of the top 10 Jianghu sects of Liyang in one fell swoop, ranking only behind the missing moon house on the great snow plateau of Mount Hui. 2 men and 1 woman were drinking tea together. Listening to the wind, their teeth were fragrant and their sleeves were filled with a cool breeze. The woman was close to 30 years old, but she was very childish and beautiful. Her charm was full of treacherous contradictions. She was the 4th most beautiful woman on the Rouge rankings. Her name was ordinary and strange, surname Xia, given name Xia. It was said that after she was 14 years old, the Western Shu Road had a total of 5 people, Jingshi and Jidushi, fought for her. However, for more than 10 years, no one was able to take her into their pocket. Outsiders said that it was because of the Spring Invitation Cottage's extraordinary status. At this moment she was pouring tea for a man in white. Not only were the people of Shu speechless, but even the people of Spring Invitation Cottage were puzzled. This outsider surnamed Qin had transformed the vase into the owner of the 2,000 mu of bamboo. It could not be helped. He was the Minister of War before Liu Baijie took office, the current king of Shu Qin Jibao. The middle-aged man sitting opposite Qin Jibao was the uncle that Su Fengyan had gone to Beimang to find. He was a swordsman from the Wu family sword tomb, Wuxia. He was also one of the commanders of the Su family's cavalry in the past. Wuxia had recognized his nephew Su Fengyan at the top of Beimang city walls but did not acknowledge him. He smiled insincerely and asked playfully, the Emperor of Liang wants to give you his favorite daughter. Will you accept it? Qin Jibao did not answer this question, nor did he pay attention to the woman's gaze. He only remained silent. Wuxia asked again, he died just like that. Do you have any thoughts? Qin Jibao raised his teacup and drank it as if it were wine. The Chu Imperial Palace. Chao Changqing took time out from his busy schedule and walked to the pavilion that he frequented. He saw Her Highness the Princess sitting alone in the pavilion. On her lap was the red sandalwood sword case that hid the great Liang dragon sparrow. She untied a string of copper coins and placed them neatly on the sword case. She absent-mindedly tapped it again and again. Every time she unloaded the case, the copper coins would stand up and roll down again, repeating the cycle. Jiang and I sensed the arrival of Uncle Chess awaiting orders. She touched the sword case and quickly put away the copper coins. Chao Changqing sat on the stone bench and hesitated. Just as he was about to speak, Jiang and I squeezed out a smile and said softly, it's okay. He's the king of Beiliang. I'm the princess of Dechu. I know. Chao Changqing was silent. Chao Changqing slowly closed his eyes, still hesitating to speak. Jiang and I clenched the copper coins and muttered to herself, a scourge lives for 1,000 years. Chao Changqing opened his eyes and sighed, if only it was a little later. The northern Mang's royal tents that stretched as far as a majestic city were moved to the southern dynasty. Just like before, the northern Mang empress continued to discuss matters in the ash painting that had been passed down from generation to generation. After the discussion was over, the northern Mang empress asked Dong Zhuo and Hong Jingyan, these 2 new and powerful military nobles, to stay behind. She smiled and asked, In the past 1,000 years, who could be said to be the pinnacle of martial arts? Hong Jingyan bowed and replied, 800 years ago, there was the unknown master behind the great Qin emperor. Between 700 and 500 years ago, it was Lu Dongshen who could be considered invincible. 400 years ago it was Gao Shulu. 100 years ago Lu Songtao was only half a master. Next is the current Wang Xinji. When these 4.5 masters were alive, there was rarely another master who was on par with them. Even if there was a master beyond this world, they had never fought. For example, Wang Xinji and Qi Xuanzhen. The Empress of Beimeng laughed. This time Wang Xinji used Su Fengnian as an example. Is it using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, or is it a great phenomenon that hasn't happened in 1,000 years? Hong Jingyan whispered, the odds are 9 to 1. The old woman said, then it's a narrow escape. Dong Zhuo, who had been standing beside Hong Jingyan all this time, didn't reply. He waited until the tent was completely silent before he said with a gloating expression, it's good that they're dead. They didn't even need a single soldier and half of Liyang's northwest gate has already collapsed. When the news reaches here, Hong Jingyan, do you want to have a competition to see who's faster? Hong Jingyan completely ignored this fat man. The Empress waved her hand. The two of them walked out of the tent at the same time, one on the left and one on the right. The old woman smiled. Father and son, are you going to meet so soon? At the peak of Zhulu Mountain. A white dress versus a red dress. The woman in white sat on the stone steps at the top. She raised a wine pot and drank wine without any worry between her eyebrows. For some reason, the otherworldly item in the red dress was facing the white dress Luo Yang. Luo Yang said indifferently, it's okay. No one in the world believes him, but I do. Luo Yang suddenly stood up and raised her arm. She smiled knowingly and said, I won't change for 800 years. Chapter 1107. Su Fengnian had Gao Shulu's physique, and with the help of Lu Haosher and Song Yanqing's last strike, his steps grew larger and larger. In the last step he crossed a distance of several hundred feet and crashed into Wang Xinji. Wang Xinji took a large step forward as if she didn't care too much about it. She faced the man and the sword with a simple punch, and her strength was enough to defeat 10 people. 2 majestic auras collided with each other, and the heavens and earth rang with the solemn sound of a yellow bell. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian crashed into Wang Xinji with his shoulder, while Wang Xinji's fist landed on Su Fengnian's forehead. Wang Xinji had been blocking the waves of the East Sea year after year, and she was still able to remain unscathed. However, this time, her feet sank into the yellow sand and she slid back a distance of 16 to 17 feet. Su Fengnian didn't have it easy either. He was hit in the forehead between his eyebrows. He staggered about a foot above the ground, but he still maintained his posture of riding the wind. The distance he retreated was roughly the same as Wang Xinji's. Both sides did not wait for the bell's momentum to completely remove the embers left on their bodies, and they began to collide for the second time. This time, it was the elbows that collided first, and Wang Xinji pushed her palm upwards, hitting Su Fengnian's chest. Su Fengnian slapped down on Wang Xinji's head. Su Fengnian's body surged and finally stopped in the air 80 to 90 feet away. His sleeves fluttered slightly, as if he was an immortal ascending to the heavens. Wang Xinji did not retreat, but her knees sank into the sand. She raised her head and looked at the calm young man. The hemp-clothed old man did not say anything. When he reached the top of the world, his heart was like an ancient well without ripples. He had waited bitterly for so many years, and he no longer had the feeling of breaking a wooden horse or ox with his finger. It was a mixture of surprise and joy, and it was truly like drinking wine. Wang Xinji brushed her sleeves and smiled for no reason. After reaching the first rank, when fighting with the same level, especially with the masters of the Vajra realm, the body and aura would merge into one. It was often the process of tearing apart one's clothes and armor. Only by removing the aura around the body could one destroy the body's muscles and bones. However, this kid was as confident as him, almost to the point of conceit. No matter how abundant the aura was, he would do the opposite and destroy the body once and for all. He wanted to destroy the body first before thinking about anything else. Gao Shulu once used to describe the majesty of the first rank's realm. Most martial artists in the future were obsessed with the protection brought by their aura, like the officials who found a big backer and a protective talisman. Their path was smooth sailing. As time they forgot how to persist and how to self-reliance. Was it the finger or the celestial phenomenon and the celestial and had. And a smooth journey of heavens had been the time they The time they have. For thousands of years there were countless men. Why did Wang Xinji only respect Lu Dongxian and Li Chungang? One of them passed through the gate of heaven but did not enter. He returned to the human world laughing. The other person did not even bother to open the gate of heaven for him. Wang Xinji's feet sank into the ground, and Su Fengnian stood in the air. It was like a battle between heaven and earth. The seemingly calm battlefield suddenly changed when Wang Xinji pulled out one of her feet and Su Fengnian pressed down with one of his hands at the same time. On the ground, a clay sword shaped like a stone tablet broke out of the ground. Su Fengnian also pulled a wisp of cloud aura to form a sword. Wang Xinji held the clay sword in her hand and leaped up. Su Fengnian reached out to grab the cloud aura sword, and his body suddenly dropped down. In the third confrontation, the two still chose to fight head-on without any fancy thoughts. The clay tablet smashed into Su Fengnian's chest inch by inch, and the cloud aura also shattered inch by inch on Wang Xinji's chest. When the dust of the clay tablet settled and the cloud aura dispersed, the number 1 in the world and the number 6 in the world punched left fist against right fist. Their fists collided violently, but their bodies did not move an inch, and there was a moment of silence that defied common sense. However, ripples appeared on Wang Xinji's and Su Fengnian's robes. The two's hands that were controlling their swords were not willing to fall behind, and they clenched their fists and collided again. Within a radius of several miles, the ground shook violently and the cloud aura rolled. Wang Xinji was pushed back to the ground. When she landed, she swung her arm and threw out a punch. The incomparably fierce fist aura tore several yellow flood dragons from the ground and attacked Su Fengnian together. Even if Su Fengnian had Gao Shulu's physique, he could still control the mysterious finger sword chi with his mind. However, his soul was lacking, so he did not have the heavenly phenomenon realm. He could only cross his arms in front of his chest in the air, relying on his body that was even stronger than the invincible Vajra body of Buddhism to block that fist aura. Afterward, a few flood dragons formed from yellow sand and soil took advantage of this opportunity to attack. Su Fengnian pulled back his left hand and grabbed a flood dragon's neck, killing it quickly. The yellow sand scattered like rain. He stepped on the head of the flood dragon and pushed it back to the ground. The corpse or corpse chi showed signs of collapsing like a dead snake on the ground. Wang Xinji did not show any mercy after gaining the upper hand. She walked on the ground step by step and constantly punched towards the sky. The white fist aura and the yellow dragon shot towards the young lord standing under the clouds together. The earth emits murderous intent, and the dragon and snake rise from the land. Su Fengnian took a deep breath, and a purple golden mark between his eyebrows shone brightly. Instead of dodging, he looked like he was seeking his own death. He actively looked for the white fist aura to smash or cut it off. His feet were like walking on the ground and he stepped on the yellow dragon again and again. If someone was lucky enough to watch the battle from afar, they would definitely be shocked by the terrifying phenomenon. On the ground, there were constantly white rainbows piercing through the sky, and countless yellow dragons flew up one after another, as if they were roaring at the legendary heavenly court. And the white robe in the sky seemed to be in a fit of pique. He wanted to kill all the white rainbows in the sky, and not let them turn into real dragons. This magnificent scene lasted for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, and the battlefield had also advanced for more than 10 miles. The road that Wang Xinji walked on was full of destruction. In the sky, the clouds and yellow sand were mixed together, and then they rustled and fell together. People like to use the difference between cloud and earth to describe the huge difference between the two, but at this time the scene had already been blurred. Chapter 1108. Huang Longshi carried the girl far away to avoid being affected by the invisible killing intent. From time to time he would look back at the battlefield. The old man helped his daughter carry the sunflower and could not help but sigh with emotion. Jia in his arms still did not wake up. She just subconsciously hugged the sable hat, the beaded golden hairpin wrapped in the hat pocket. Huang Longshi did not stop walking, but he kept turning his head to look at the painting that was created by man. The long scroll slowly spread out in the world. It should not stop for a while. When it would end, only heaven knows. Huang Longshi was somewhat lost in thought. He muttered, Jianghu in the imperial court, Wang Xinji in Jianghu, there are two such figures. One is a roly-poly official, the other is an old fart. How can the others have a day of success? If anyone were to stand behind them, it would be a fact that made them feel despair just by thinking about it. The group of Spring of Yong Hui's achievements and knowledge are all excellent civil officials. Among the generals there is Guangling Dao's Lu Xingxiang, and those members of the imperial family who have failed to achieve meritorious service. In the world of Wulin, there is Dong Tai's sword, Gu Jiantong's saber, and Chao Changqing's scholarly spirit. In the past and in the future, any one of them would be a famous figure. Huang Longshi withdrew his gaze and continued to ramble. The great Qin lost a deer, Liang is not far away. Bai Yin'er is the deer of Liang. He knows his fate, there is no way out, he has already begun to make arrangements for his funeral. If he lives alone and does not retreat, then the poor people of the world will not be able to see the future. But not only does old Wang not retreat, he wants to go one step further. One is the peak of civil officials, the other is the peak of martial arts. These two people at first glance seem to have the same realm and status, but in fact, there is a big difference in their bones. It is indeed true that the path of civil and martial arts is different. This old man in the past helped Jianghu's fate by pulling up seedlings to help them grow. It should be right to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. This old man has read too many stories and people in books. All these years he has exhausted his mind and thought about everything step by step. Is he going to make a mistake at the end? The last time Huang Longshan looked back was an hour after the start of the battle. He did not see the expected mixture of clouds and earth, but the atmosphere of heaven and earth was exceptionally clear. Huang Longshi sighed. That kid most likely lost the first half of the battle. The reality was just as Huang Sanjia expected. Even if Su Fengyan used Gao Shu to reveal his physique, then he used Murong Baoding's erecting Buddha, Shuesongguan's huge clapper, Wudong's immortal caressing the top, and so on, all kinds of mystical techniques, and their coordination was flawless, they were only able to block the seemingly endless murderous aura. Within an hour, Su Fengyan had destroyed more than 100 fist forces and killed more than 400 flood dragons. This was just Su Fengyan's anger. Before the first collision, Su Fengyan's breath had already been completed, and there was no more breath left. He had even prepared how to deal with Wang Xinji's thunderous attack when he needed to exchange for his second breath. However, Su Fengyan's 3 journeys in Jianghu had helped him to be careful and cautious, and it had instead resulted in a not-so-big, not-so-small consequence. When he made his move, Wang Xinji, who was still secretly accumulating power, found an opportunity that was not perfect, and used a suppression that was even more powerful than the one he used against Wang Xiaoping by the Guangling River. At the same time that the earth unleashed its murderous aura, the sky unleashed its murderous aura. Together they crushed Su Fengyan, who was in the middle of it. The clouds in the sky, which had always been used by Su Fengyan, left their tracks. In the blink of an eye, dark clouds covered the sky. Just like the movement of the stars, it was enough to change Su Fengyan's originally shaky balance. It was not that Su Fengyan had not sensed Wang Xinji's backup plan, but he had expected that there was still about 15 minutes before Wang Xinji would summon the clouds in the sky, cater to the earth's murderous intent. He was 70 to 80% sure that he would be trapped in that cage, and in the end, allow Wang Xinji to unleash his murderous intent. This was also a slight influence brought about by his incomplete soul. However, against Wang Xinji, this slight deviation was enough to put him in great danger. Wang Xinji raised an elbow, pressed his palms together and twisted heavily. His palms then suddenly turned upside down. Wasn't the easiest thing in the world, as easy as turning one's hand? Wang Xinji's lips curled into a cold smile, waiting to see. He did not think that killing a Su Fengyan, who only had the physique of Gao Shulu, would be difficult. When a person unleashed his murderous intent, the heavens and the earth were turned upside down. With Su Fengyan's position as the center, the heaven and the earth, which had been separated for thousands of years, were actually turned upside down. The earth was above and the sky was below. Su Fengyan's misfortune was that he did not have any extra qi in his body, but the fortune in his misfortune also lay in this. Otherwise, even if Xinyuan Qingfeng and Lu Haoshi, these great celestial phenomenon experts, were present, their cultivation would also be turned into dust. When Wang Xinji attacked Wang Xiaoping, it could be said that he had only used a small part of his move. This was also reasonable. The original intention of this move was to deal with immortals like Qi Xuanzhen. The essence of this move was to reverse karma. Not to mention the celestial phenomenon realm, the higher the cultivation of an earth immortal, the more severe the damage. Su Fengyan took advantage of the situation, and changed his standing position along with the heaven and earth that had been turned upside down. Between heaven and earth, one should be indomitable. If this was said to be an unattainable speech, it would not be suitable for everyone. However, Su Fengyan had never been so ambitious. He only felt that no matter who it was, as long as they stood in a position, they had to shoulder something. If it was an ordinary commoner, they had to shoulder the responsibility of their parents' retirement. If it was a descendant of an aristocratic family, they had to shoulder the family's legacy. If it was a court official, they had to shoulder the rise and fall of the world. Su Fengnian only remembered that he had promised Su Xiao on the carriage outside the North Pass that Su Xiao would leave behind the burden. He could bear it. Su Fengnian did indeed bear the weight of heaven and earth brought by Wang Xinji. Su Fengnian, who was standing upside down, gradually bent his knees. For the first time, the young vassal king who had exposed his physique showed a dispirited look. A trace of blood oozed out, not from his 7 orifices, but from between his eyebrows. Wang Xinji's sneer deepened. When Su Fengnian was about to bear all the heaven's might, before he could break free from the cage by relying on his celestial being physique, the old man's figure flashed. The next moment, Wang Xinji rushed into the cage, grabbed Su Fengnian's neck and pulled it down. He broke the edge of the cage and smashed into the ground. Like a comet hitting the ground. The ground cracked and a bottomless pit appeared. Wang Xinji's fingers intertwined, and his hands clenched into a fist. With a loud shout, his burly body was about to fall. A sword pierced through the air. It came from the lotus peak of Wudong Mountain in Bailiang. Someone's sword was even stronger than the wind. A sword and a person hit the side of Wang Xinji, who was falling. Wang Xinji was knocked out dozens of feet. On the ground, Su Fengnian jumped out of the huge pit. Blood was still flowing from between his eyebrows, blurring his eyes and even blurring his face. The sword Immortal, who was like a celestial being, drew an arc with his sword and landed beside him. The two Su Fengnian stood side by side. Wang Xinji, who stopped in the air, narrowed his eyes, and looked down at the ground with a slightly gloomy face. The Su Fengnian, who had just arrived at the battlefield, smiled and said, "I have a sword to walk 6,000 miles. Chapter 1109. The peachwood sword that once pierced through Wang Xinji's chest was still sheathed, quietly hovering beside the Su Fengnian. The Su Fengnian who rode on his sword smiled and said, "Let's go." The peachwood sword was connected to the person and slowly left the scabbard. At first it was unusually slow, but gradually, it moved as fast as a rolling thunder, leaving a long rainbow mist in the sky. Even those who did not know martial arts could see it clearly. The foundation of this sword was like the old servant who lacked front teeth nicknamed Jianhu in Jianghu. He did not practice many sword moves because he thought he was clumsy. He was afraid of biting off more than he could chew, so he walked slowly and leisurely in Jianghu. It did not matter where he went as long as he did not miss the scenery along the way. When Jianhu struck, the peachwood sword disappeared without a trace. Wang Xinji, who was high above, flicked his finger several times. He was the Xuanlong Dianxue in the mysterious realm, but he could not break the Qi meridian that the sword traveled 6,000 miles. Wang Xinji did not want to waste his time. He stopped his finger but did not hurry to withdraw it. He was like an imperial scholar who was trying to solve a question. Wang Xinji suddenly turned his head. At the same time, a wisp of sword qi brushed past his cheek, cutting off a few strands of the old man's snow-white hair. Wang Xinji did not strike his finger again. He remained motionless and then took a step back. A wisp of sword qi flew past his chest, cutting off some linen shreds. After that, Wang Xinji maintained the posture of bending his finger but occasionally moved his feet. Each time he narrowly avoided the hidden sword qi. Wang Xinji was a little surprised. He had once faced the yellow formation map at the top of the martial emperor city and was familiar with this sword. The 8-finger swords did not make him take it seriously. The 9th sword had indeed ruined his sleeves. Although it was only the celestial phenomenon sword, Jian Zhuang's celestial phenomenon was very innovative. The origin of a normal celestial phenomenon master came from a good work of a sage. Generally speaking, if things are not balanced, they will sing. All things in the world, birds sang in spring, thunder shook summer, insects mourned in autumn and the wind blew in winter. Therefore, scholars and officials often wrote poems. Since ancient times, the reason why swordsmen could dominate the world was that they could naturally use the sword in their hands to complain about injustice. Wang Xinji once told Chao Changqing in private that he should give up the country and forget about his feelings and practice swordsmanship, and he would be able to become a saint early. Jian Zhuang's 9th sword had clearly crossed the threshold of heavenly phenomenon but had yet to reach the level of a sword immortal. Yet it did not give off the slightest feeling of injustice. On the contrary, it had caught Wang Xinji off guard. Logically speaking, a good person with a gentle temperament would never be able to practice a good sword. This was the same principle as a scholar who was happy to see injustice in the mountains. It was the same principle with swordsmanship. The advantage lay in the profoundness of each move and the emergence of one strange force after another. The sword's current style was also eccentric. After the move, there was no grand sword momentum like dark clouds. Instead, it was tirelessly swinging the sword back and forth. It was full of the earthly atmosphere, like dogs barking and chickens crying. It was like neighbors quarreling, but because of their relationship they only used their mouths and not their hands. It gave people the feeling that it was noisy and annoying. This new sword was only slightly different from the old sword that Jianghu had handed over. It was in that the latter was more skillful and crafty. Immortals rode on their swords in the wind and frosted 19 provinces in one night. This saying was used to describe the swiftness of sword immortals. The peachwood sword flew around Xianxia. It was unknown how long it had traveled. A few hundred miles? 1,000 miles? Xianxia knew. She had already wandered unscrupulously around him for a full 3,000 miles. The furthest she went was 9 miles. The closest she went was naturally brushing past him. She went back and forth tirelessly. Sometimes she drew an arc to escape for more than 100 feet, and sometimes she flew in a straight line for 3 to 4 miles. There was no pattern and no trace. Xianxia was still waiting. She was still bending her fingers without flicking them. Until the 7th time she missed the peachwood sword by a hair's breadth. After a short moment she finally tapped her finger lightly. Her finger tapped the air, but suddenly there was a very subtle sound of metal colliding with stone in front of Xianxia. The further she was from Xianxia, the louder the sound became. 6 miles away, the peachwood sword, which was made of ordinary material but had caused Xianxia great trouble, exploded in midair with a bang, turning into a pile of wood chips. Su Fengyin waved his hand. The chips returned from afar, condensed into a sword, and gently returned to the scabbard. After returning to the scabbard, the sword dissipated again. The scabbard was the tomb of the sword. Su Fengyin inserted the scabbard into the yellow sand by his feet. Clearly he had decided not to use it again. Old Huang was never one to talk about fancy principles. He couldn't say something like, "Where my heart is at ease is my home." He only knew one thing. He was an old man who had left his hometown. Wherever he could sleep comfortably was where his home was. As long as he could sleep comfortably in the simple and crude room next to the stable on Mount Qingliang, that would be his home. Lying on a pillow thinking about the few jars of old wine under the bed, he didn't lack anything and didn't need to think too much. Therefore, old Huang's sword was fearless when it left the scabbard, and he had no regrets when it returned to the scabbard. Therefore, on his last trip to the Jianghu with his sword, returning the sword to the scabbard was like returning home. Swordsmen of my generation were not afraid of death. They didn't hesitate to break their beloved sword. Su Fengyin, who only occupied 1 spiritual and 2 physical forms, said softly, "After Saber 9, it should be Saber 10. He extended a hand and put 2 fingers together. With a gentle swipe, a long saber formed from purplish gold energy appeared under his fingers. It was shaped like a new 6th-generation Bailiang saber. It was not recorded in the orthodox Taoist scriptures that living people had 3 spiritual and 7 physical forms. People were skeptical. However, Su Fengyin, who had withstood Xianxia's heaven and earth pressure, was extremely certain. Apart from his living body, he was only left with 1 physical form, Filth Remover. The 3 spiritual and 6 physical forms that the other 3 possessed were each in their own dreams. Su Fengyin squatted beside the pit. When another version of himself appeared, he did not watch the battle. Instead, he squatted down and hurriedly took in deep breaths to cleanse and remove the turbid energy in his body. Gao Shulu's physique was originally a pure body. Xianxia's shrewdness was to see through his filth remover with a glance. Under the overturning of heaven and earth, she forcefully stuffed him with countless amounts of filth. Gao Shulu's vigorous physique could almost ignore ordinary injuries. His recovery speed was so fast that it was beyond the reach of ordinary Vajra realm cultivators. Even if his internal organs were destroyed or even his heart was pierced, he could still defy heaven and continue to live for a few hours. Chapter 11:10. The squatting Su Fengyin was surrounded by black qi. He stared intently at the cracks on the edge of the crater. A small clue revealed the general situation. After Su Fengyin became the 6th in the world, many outsiders began to study the martial arts process of this new Prince Liang. Most were surprised by Su Fengyin's secret learning. They didn't know that after his battle with Luo Yang in Dong Tai, in order to understand the sword intent in Beimang's Dunhuang city, he had memorized the small cracks created by the flying swords of both sides. They also didn't know how much effort he had put into controlling Lu Hao's entry into the city and Song Yanqing's stagger. And after the peachwood sword that could be considered Wang Xiaoping's relic returned to the top of Lotus Peak, it wasn't to indirectly impart the sword intent, but to search for clues, to investigate Wang Xinji's unique qi circulation. Shenyuan Qingfeng blocked the way only to repay his debt, to cut off his thoughts. If he couldn't pass, then everything would be over. Once he passed, he would be able to surpass all others on the martial path. But the Wudong sword maniac and useless monk's block was not so simple. One was asking for a clear conscience, the other was offering incense. But without question, both were trying to find a flaw in Wang Xinji that might not even exist. Other than Miss Haha, who was originally unexpected, it was Su Yanbing's turn to block Wang Xinji's path single-handedly. He was definitely prepared to die. This man had once joked that even if Su Yanbing died in Bailiang, the king of Bailiang must die. The words that came out of his mouth were definitely not a joke. Crouching down, Su Fengyin didn't bother to wipe away the bloodstains on his face. Actually, when he had withstood the pressure of the world, the boots that had touched the ground had long been worn away. His feet were badly mangled. At that time, when he tilted his head and slant his shoulders had also been worn to the bone. However, after being thrown to the ground by Wang Xinji, these injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, the torn clothes and bottomless boots on his shoulders were proof of the dangerous situation at that moment. How many people could make Su Fengyin, who was now strong enough to dominate both the Separation Sun and northern Meng Jianghu, suffer such heavy injuries? Other than Wang Xinji, who had not used all her strength, there were only Tuoba Bodhisattva and Dong Tai who wanted to fight to the death. Su Fengyin continued to stare at the cracks on the ground. Only when his vision was blocked by the blood did he raise his arm and carelessly wipe away the thick blood on his face from between his eyebrows. Standing, Su Fengyin held the hilt of his saber and looked down at the extraordinary Bailiang saber. He said to himself, "This saber should have been for Zhao Huangqiao." He closed his eyes and took a big step back. His right hand opened in front of him, and his left hand held the saber behind him. The wind and clouds surged and the yellow sand floated. Su Fengyin finally stood up from his squatting position, as if he wanted to witness himself wielding the saber. He pressed a finger between his eyebrows. The blood was blocked, but it still seeped through the gaps between his fingers. The face that Bailiang's old man said was very similar to the princess's face, flowed down in a zigzag way. He wielded the saber. First, there was the continuous sound of thunder. Then the gangqi of the saber tore the sky in a line. This was a saber move that Su Fengyin had comprehended on his own. The first half of the saber move came from observing the Guangling River's tide from a close distance. Before the head of the tide could be seen, the sound of the tide was like thunder piercing one's ears. Only after that could one see the misty river, the head of the tide gradually rising, like a row of majestic snowy mountains cascading down from Mount Kunlun. The second half of the move was more spiritual. It came from when he was in an out-of-body state. He saw the stirring and stirring battle at the western wall with his own eyes. White clothes and white mourning clothes beat the war drums, and a few people led their horses back in armor. Then, there was this saber move that had never been seen before. Old Huang did not know how to name the move, and Su Fengyin did not even have the time to name it. This saber move was like a freehand splashing ink on paper. The saber blade was the tip of the brush, and the ink spilled out in a huge arc. Wang Xinji did not dodge. She pressed her hands on the top of the arc of Gangqi. She was brought up to the sky by the saber arc until she disappeared into the clouds. Even higher up where Wang Xinji stopped, the stellar energy that had been cut through did not dissipate into the 9 heavens. Instead, like the Guangling River surging past a line of waves, it formed an even more majestic returning tide in the old salt storehouse. The tide poured down majestically from the sky. Since Wang Xinji smashed Su Fengyin into the ground after showing her killing intent again and again, it was only right to reciprocate politeness. Su Fengyin did not wait for Wang Xinji to break the waterfall of Gangqi. Instead, he took out a Bailiang saber. It was simple and heavy. It was the Su family's first-generation saber. Su Zhao's troops went south all the way. He crossed the river to the south time and time again. He fought to the death time and time again. He narrowly escaped death time and time again. He was laughed at by outsiders. He was mocked as a mad dog willing to bite people without the mercy of the Liang imperial court. Su Xiao never opened his mouth to argue with anyone. He also never explained anything to his eldest son, Su Fengyin. Su Fengyin only knew the answer when he was in a trance. Su Xiao had always been a pawn crossing the river in precarious times. He did not want to die, but he was not afraid of death either. Who cares about your mother's world structure? Who cares about your mother's emperors? Who cares about your mother's chessboard rules? Su Fengyin took a step forward with the saber in hand. He pointed the tip of the saber upward at Wang Xinji, who was in the clouds. He whispered softly, "Cross the river." A black rainbow hung upside down from the ground. Wang Xinji, who was fighting against the inverted waterfall, was hit in the chest by the saber. The two Su Fengyin standing on the ground could see the black dot being slowly pressed down by the waterfall. Then the saber violently slammed back into the distant dome. The Su Fengyin who had traveled through the black and white seasons sighed and said softly, "It's difficult." Su Fengyin nodded but soon smiled and said, "But this time the old man won't dare to only use 70 to 80% of his strength." Just as he finished speaking, a beam of light descended from the sky. The earth trembled with it. Wang Xinji was like a god of the heavenly court. He walked out of the heavenly gate and descended to the world. A fist-sized wound appeared on the chest of the hemp-clothed old man. Even though the body of this world's most powerful man was not inferior to that of Gao Shulu, who had been at her peak for 400 years, there were still no signs of recovery. There were sprouts in his flesh. The scene was strange. They suddenly grew and suddenly died. What was even more mysterious was that after Wang Xinji was knocked into the clouds, he actually dragged down a bolt of lightning as long as a spear. Wang Xinji, whose shoulders were severely damaged, asked with a cold expression, "Is that all you've got?" Who in the world could be a match for this martial artist who was probably above the celestial beings? How could he kill him if he won? Moreover, Su Fengyin most likely would not be able to wait until the last pair of spirits who had not returned from their long journey. Chapter 11:11. Su Fengyin, who only had one spirit of filth removal left, had stopped the bleeding between his eyebrows. The Su Fengyin beside him, who had just returned from an out-of-body state, had one spirit and two spirits. Although he still lacked 2 spirits and 4 spirits, he was still able to hurt Wang Xinji. Su Fengyin didn't think he was weak. However, arguing with Wang Xinji was useless. Therefore, facing Wang Xinji's question, he didn't argue with this angry old man. Instead, he just repaired the body gifted by Gao Shulu. Wang Xinji sneered, "So you don't have any last words?" Su Fengyin stretched out his hands and covered his face, wiping off the blood with his 10 fingers. His eyes were clear. Wang Xinji said the word "good" heavily. Then Su Fengyin, who had just returned on his sword, saw Wang Xinji step out and throw out the long spear made of thunder and lightning from the sky. However, when he saw this scene, Su Fengyin, who had a physical body, had already been sent flying backward, crashing to the ground 1,000 feet away. His uncontrollable body even bounced a little on the ground and continued to slide for over 100 feet before coming to a stop. Wang Xinji's move was so fast that Su Fengyin, who was still standing, could only see the residual shadow of Wang Xinji after throwing out the spear. Su Fengyin, who had fallen to the ground, slowly got up and bent over. His chest was badly mutilated, with white thunder and lightning twirling around and sizzling. When Su Fengyin reached out his hand, countless thin red threads and red snakes swam out of his arm. When Su Fengyin's fingers touched them, the red threads and the white lightning died together. It was obvious that the secret skill Su Fengyin stole from Han Diaoxi's head didn't work immediately. The long spear of thunder and lightning in Wang Xinji's hand was still there, but its momentum was reduced by 20%. Another footprint appeared in the sand in front of the old man. Su Fengyin, who had just stood up, was hit by the lightning spear again. However, he wasn't knocked down this time. He tilted his head back slightly and held a piece of thunder and lightning in his hands to prevent it from stabbing his neck. Then he stepped back lightly on the ground. The first time he deliberately opened his door and took the thunder strike because Su Fengyin wanted to learn more about Wang Xinji's chi flow with the help of Gao Shulu's pure body. Since Wang Xinji's second spear was the same, there was no need to take all the attacks as before. The footprint in front of Wang Xinji was getting deeper and deeper, and the gap between throwing the spear was getting shorter and shorter. In the distance, Su Fengyin could only retreat again and again. He retreated 8 times in a row and used the nameless fist technique taught by Wudong Su Fengyin for the last time. His waist was like an axle and his body was in a circle. His hands followed Su Fengyin's body and moved around in circles. When Su Fengyin finally stood still, his spine was straight and his back was not hunched. His hands gently swayed up and down. A few inches above his palms, there was a ball of thunder and lightning that rose and fell. They looked playful and light, but it was easy to underestimate the power of thunder and lightning contained in them. Su Fengyin's hands moved in an arc, and the 2 snow-white balls of thunder and lightning merged into one and gradually dissipated in front of him. At the same time, Su Fengyin, who had returned from the black and white spring-autumn, had a drastic change in expression. He began to turn around and rush toward himself. The 9th footprint appeared in front of Wang Xinji, who only had 3 feet of thunder and lightning left in her hands. Before Su Fengyin's soul was about to crash into Su Fengyin's body, Wang Xinji had already closed in on the latter. She took the initiative to make a move, but it was unknown whether it was a spear or a sword. The 3 feet of thunder and lightning instantly pierced through Su Fengyan's body like a knife cutting through tofu. Wang Xinji's right hand held the 3 feet of thunder and lightning that had successfully broken through Su Fengyan's body. She suddenly lifted it up and lifted Su Fengyan's entire body into the air. The next scene was puzzling. Before Wang Xinji could pull out the thunder and lightning, Su Fengyan took the lead. His hands pressed down on the immortal weapon that seemed to have come from the 9th heaven, and he kicked Wang Xinji's shoulder. His body floated 2 feet away and staggered. Not only did he not take the opportunity to pull out the thunder and lightning, but he also fiercely slapped it and took the initiative to pierce through Wang Xinji's body. Wang Xinji did not take advantage of the victory to pursue and attack. He stood in place and nodded. For the first time he showed a bit of appreciation. If he had pulled out the thunder and lightning, then this kid would have suffered the first 8 spears and the last sword for nothing. The 8 spears were just a smokescreen. The key was the sword that Wang Xinji had just created. Originally he wanted to give it to Dong Tai, who had just returned from a visit to immortality. Everyone in the world used the 3-foot sword to describe a long sword, and his sword move was called 3 feet. The superior way of the sword always emphasized the idea rather than the technique, and the deep meaning of 3 feet naturally lay in the 3 feet. If Su Fengyan had pulled out the thunder and lightning to lessen his injuries, he naturally would not have understood the profound meaning. However, even if he understood the meaning of 3 feet sword, what could he do? Even if he, Wang Xinji, was only a swordsman, he still had 4 sword moves that were no less than 3 feet. The reason why he chose this move was that since Su Fengyan had injured him with a single strike, he wanted an eye for an eye. Even if the size of the wound was the same, it had to be exactly the same. As for the other 4 Earth Immortal swords, Wang Xinji's original intention was to kill 1,000 horsemen with 1 strike, and the imperial court was nothing to him. Wang Xinji was born in a poor family. At that time it was far from the current Liang imperial court, where all rivers flowed into the sea. He was truly from a poor family with no noble children. He still remembered that after he abandoned literature to practice martial arts, after going through many hardships, he finally learned a rough lightness skill for the first time. However, he did not dare to show his skills in the streets, so he could only experience the feeling of flying on the grass in the wilderness and stepping on the snow without leaving a trace. When he was exhausted, he used the heaven and earth as his bed and blanket, and casually lay down on the grass or the snow. He still remembered the smell of mud and grass and the cold feeling of washing his face with snow. Later on, by chance, he switched to practicing swordsmanship midway. When the sword produced sword chi, the ecstasy at that time was still fresh in his memory, no matter how many years had passed. After that, step by step, he stood at the peak of martial arts, overlooking the world and flying with the wind. When he looked around, there was no one to stand shoulder to shoulder with, so there were not many things worth remembering. The 2 Su Fengyan stood together, but their souls did not merge into one. This was because Wang Xinji's sword had injured the chi far more than the body. Since Gao Shulu's body could still withstand it, there was no need to draw legs on a snake. If they rashly merged into one, it would be like walking into a trap. Moreover, it would damage the originally invincible golden body that could be said to be free of filth. Wang Xinji's wound had already sprouted tender shoots all over the place. One after another, new muscles and bones were growing out. The injury on his chest was no longer shocking. It was now the Su Fengyan's turn to suffer. The red snake struggled to cling onto him, but it was still unable to completely dispel the remaining thunder and lightning sword chi. Wang Xinji suddenly said, when this old man was still a scholar, he had a heart-to-heart talk with a senior scholar. He said something to him. Today, I'm afraid the senior's bones have already turned to dust in his grave, but this old man still remembers it. Instead of being recorded in the annals of history, it's better to be hanged at the gate of the country. But in those troubled times, this scholar died in the midst of the turmoil and chaos of war. He did not put his ambition into the imperial court, nor did he die a worthy death. When this old man heard the news of his death, when he went to collect his body, he simply dug it out from the hundreds of corpses lying on the ground by the roadside and hastily buried it. The long sword that this gentleman wore when he was alive was probably worth several dozen taels of silver, but it had long been taken away. The gentleman's remains were given to me as goods to exchange for official hats or wine money. When has Wang Xinji ever blocked the path of a younger generation? This old man oversaw the Eastern Sea. As long as he was alive, has there ever been a martial artist like Lu Songtao, who was confident in his backing and brought disaster to the world? The imperial court was powerful, with armor on their backs and cavalry galloping, while the common people were unarmed and defenseless. The world was divided into ups and downs, and the ones who died the most were precisely these innocent people. This old man did not want these people to encounter the oppression of the government in times of peace and prosperity, as well as the wandering bandits in times of chaos. He did not want everyone to be able to easily deal with them. He only hoped that more people, when they were at the end of their rope or even before death, would be able to take a step forward, instead of only being able to kneel down and kowtow to beg for mercy. Wang Xinji did not ask for much. He only wanted to give the people of the world one step only. Su Fengnian calmly asked, "Why are you saying these things?" Wang Xinji indifferently said, "This old man has lived for too long and has seen too many things. Usually he has nothing to say to anyone. You, kid, are not willing to say your last words, but this old man wants you to die with a clear understanding. If you were an ordinary descendant of a vassal king, relying on the machinations of 2 generations to inherit the throne, why would this old man talk nonsense with you? Even killing you would dirty his hands." Su Fengnian was about to speak, but Wang Xinji waved his hand and said, "This old man is well aware of what you want to say. It's just that whoever has the bigger fist has the bigger reason. No matter what you say, this old man is not willing to listen to you. It's as simple as that." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's still too early to decide who has the bigger reason. It's hard to say." Wang Xinji neither denied nor admitted. He said, "This old man has finished speaking. Who deserves to die more? The truth will be revealed very soon." 100 li away, a worry-free man with sleeves fluttering in the wind was carrying an instant spear. Purple chi came from the west. Chapter 11-12. Wang Xinji looked around with a bleak mood. Although the Su Fengnian in front of him brought some surprises, it was still inferior to the battle that he imagined. If Chen Zhibao did not come out of the cold, if Su Yanbing came with the instant spear, and if Luo Yang, who seemed to have a secret relationship with Bailiang, the 3 of them joined forces to suppress the young king. Only then could they really fight a hardy battle. Only 2 Su Fengnian showed up. Even if there were many traps, it was still not enough to fight. Su Fengnian looked up and saw that in the sky where Wang Xinji was standing, the wind was rolling and clouds were surging. Large pieces of colorful clouds were quickly gathering, like a huge brocade that was spread out by the Immortals. In the priceless advice of the Danding sect of Taoism, there was a saying, 3 flowers at one's head and 5 cheese at one's origin. But the current scene was obviously far beyond this category. A sage who was both a wine immortal and a writer and even a swordsman, once left a popular poem, "Between the clouds of the White Emperor, 1,000 miles of Jiangling returned in a day." The later generations often did not have deep feelings and did not know the true meaning of the poem. Su Fengnian sighed. Wang Xinji finally could not hold back and was ready to use his killing move. After killing people, he would open the gate of heaven. However, he would not fly to the heavenly court and become an immortal. Instead, he would guard the gate of heaven for the martial artists in the mortal world. Su Fengnian exhaled deeply. He was still not in a hurry to merge the out-of-body soul beside him with his body. Instead, he stood still and waited for Wang Xinji to reveal the truth and launch a thunderous attack. Wang Xinji took a deep breath. Her head of silver hair instantly turned dark green. She was originally a burly old man, but now she looked like a man in the prime of his life. Su Fengnian didn't admire the mysterious technique that turned something rotten into something magical. He gently closed his eyes, and a purple-gold radiance lingered on his face. After taking a deep breath, his sleeves swelled up and he seemed to be in a trance, giving off a feeling of being detached from the world. This was the mnemonic of the De Huang Imperial Court: don't care about the bustling city outside the door, close the door and face the mountain stream. Both offense and defense had their own wonders. In the blink of an eye, no less than 20 tall figures of Wang Xinji appeared between Su Fengnian and Wang Xinji. Their postures were slightly different, but they completely displayed Wang Xinji's charging momentum. This was the first time Su Fengnian was pushed back, and in one breath he was pushed back more than 1,000 feet. During this distance, nearly 100 figures of Wang Xinji appeared. Su Fengnian seemed to have no power to fight back as he retreated a second time, retreating 150 feet. Wang Xinji became more and more courageous as he fought, and his figure became more and more complicated. On a line, there were more than 200 figures of Wang Xinji that did not dissipate in time. Su Fengnian, who was passively taking the beating, kept retreating. Relying on Gao Shulu's vigorous physique and the De Huang Imperial Court's clumsiness, he did not show any signs of being defeated. However, if one looked closely, the human cat Han Diaoxi's red snake that was previously pierced by Wang Xinji's 3-inch thunderbolt had completely given up struggling. However, before the blood could seep out of the wound, it turned into a faint mist like boiling water poured on snow. On the contrary, it made Su Fengnian's clothes look clean. Wang Xinji did not stop punching. Even though she knew that Su Fengnian had the intention to use other people's stones to improve jade, Wang Xinji was very conceited. Even if Su Fengnian wanted to use his fist aura to train Gao Shulu's physique, which was not completely integrated, she could make him suffer. One of these punches would become the straw that broke the camel's back. On the straight line that cut 2 miles of the ground, more and more Wang Xinji appeared. Could be said that there were countless of them. Even if the experts of the 10 martial arts evaluators were to watch from the sidelines, their scalps would go numb. However, if Wang Xinji's disciple, the female Grandmaster Fist Master Linya, were present, she would be able to observe Wang Xinji's attacks with her own eyes. She would definitely be able to benefit greatly, and would be able to reach a higher level of enlightenment on the path of martial arts. This was because this was the world's most brilliant fist manual. Wang Xinji punched no less than 600 times. Su Fengnian did not refuse any of them and received more than 600 fist auras. Finally, a turning point came. The distance that had been constantly lengthening began to shorten for the first time. Because Wang Xinji's movements were too fast and her attacks were too fierce, even though Su Fengnian had retreated for nearly 3 miles, not a sound was heard. Finally, a loud rumble exploded behind the old man in the distance. Perhaps this was what people were used to: first see the lightning, then listen to the thunder. The first drum of energy was strong, the second was weak, and the third was exhausted. This was the common sense of the world. However, at the end, the figure of Wang Xinji that stayed in the same place began to dissipate. It seemed that Wang Xinji's momentum could not continue to rise endlessly. Like a climber, after resting for a moment, she continued to climb. Moreover, she suddenly sped up her pace. Wang Xinji, who had been punching with one hand, punched out with both hands. The great drum momentum. Wang Xinji's fist hit Su Fengnian's arms, which were crisscrossing in defense. This beat of the drum sounded at the same time as the belated thunder of the fist aura behind him. Su Fengnian's body leaned back, his feet planted on the ground, and he slid backward at an angle. The second Wang Xinji at the beginning also began to dissipate. However, the original Wang Xinji that was facing Su Fengnian suddenly sped up. She raised her arm and heavily smashed down on Su Fengnian's chest. She punched Su Fengnian into the ground and then kicked Su Fengnian, who had bounced up from the ground more than 100 feet away. Su Fengnian, whose body was more than a foot above the ground, stretched out his hands and hooked his fingers into the sand to stop his retreat. Chapter 11:13. During his second trip to Jianghu, the old man in the sheepskin fur coat had used no less than 100 two-sleeve green snakes to temper Su Fengnian's spirit. This was Li Chuangong's unique method of teaching. Later, after eating the purple gold bun given by the Beimang's grand preceptor Yuan Qingshan, Su Fengnian had also let Su Yambing beat him with all his might to digest the purple gold qi brought by the bun. This kind of clumsy method was far from being a shortcut on the path of martial arts. As long as one could endure it, it would definitely be a path that could lay a solid foundation. In the world today, in terms of ferocity, be it Tuoba Bodhisattva's fists, Dong Tai's sword, or Gu Jiantong's blade, none of them could compare to Wang Xinji's fists. After all, Su Fengnian had only received Gao Shulu's body for a short period of time. He did not have the time to completely transform it for his own use. Therefore, Wang Xinji's attacks became the best way to forge it. Every generation of Bailiang's blade had to be tempered thousands of times before it was forged. Was done. Su Fengnian's wounds healed by 70 to 80% in an instant. This was a subtle sign that the fire had reached the right level. He slapped the ground with one palm and his body spun up, once again standing in front of Wang Xinji. Su Fengnian gritted his teeth as he waited for this moment. Wang Xinji was also fishing. If the bait was too small, how could he catch the big fish of the North Sea named Kuan? The hundreds of Wang Xinjis merged into one at the same time. Su Fengnian had already begun to charge forward. Almost at the same time, Su Fengnian, who had chosen to stand by and watch, merged with Su Fengnian and returned to his body, like a wanderer returning home. If the distance between them was 10 minutes, then Wang Xinji had charged forward for 6 minutes, while Su Fengnian only had 4. Then the two of them used all their strength, throwing out a punch and a palm. Su Fengnian's soul and divine intent aside, this palm strike was already 100% of Su Fengnian's martial arts realm. Wang Xinji also no longer held back her strength. Ever since she broke the wooden horse ox 60 years ago, she had never fought with her full strength. Now she finally used her full strength and qi movement in a punch. Wang Xinji took the lead and punched Su Fengnian in the forehead. Su Fengnian slapped Wang Xinji's chin. The two of them left the ground at the same time. At the same time they returned to the ground and rooted themselves to the ground. Neither of them was willing to back down even half a step. Su Fengyan's head swung back slightly. Although Wang Xinji's head did not move, her originally greenish-black hair once again turned white. Following this, the two of them did not think about countering each other's moves. Instead they focused on attacking. Su Fengyan was probably willing to sacrifice himself, while Wang Xinji was willing to sacrifice 800 of his own to kill 1,000 of his enemies. Wang Xinji's fist continued to land on Su Fengyan's forehead. Every time Su Fengyan's head swayed back, the amplitude increased. However, Wang Xinji's white hair was not easy to notice. What was more fatal was that the old man's hair kept changing between greenish-black and frosty white. It was completely different from Su Fengyan's unstoppable decline. The two of them stood in the same place, exchanging punches and palms. Su Fengyan's forehead had already caved in, but Wang Xinji was not at ease either. Bruises and spots appeared on her face. Su Fengyan fought fiercely without retreating. At the beginning he could give Wang Xinji 10% of his strength. After exchanging more than 60 blows, he only had 80% of his strength left. Naturally, the fierce battle became a battle to the death. Su Fengyan changed from a clap and a push of his palm to a clenched fist that could naturally increase his attack range by 2 inches. The two of them were competing with great strength. Su Fengyan had already begun to think that even this little bit of calculation was extremely valuable. In the end, Su Fengyan had no choice but to change his fist into a straight-hand knife. Otherwise he would not be able to hit Wang Xinji. If it were any other opponent, Su Fengyan, whose cultivation was enough to rank among the top 3 in the world, had learned many different things. Naturally, he could use a sword with unparalleled ease. Using a saber with a powerful momentum, he could walk around with his bare hands as leisurely as he did now. How could he be so petty and haggling over every detail like he was doing now? Wang Xinji had been punching from beginning to end. Above the two celestial beings, the colorful clouds were roiling, gathering and dispersing randomly. Su Fengyan's last hand knife only hit Wang Xinji with the tip of his finger. Wang Xinji's mouth curved into a cold smile. An arrow at the end of its flight, a dying struggle. This time the old man did not fight to the death from the very beginning. Instead he went step by step. First he poured half a bowl of water, then 8 portions of tea and finally a full cup of wine. But being drunk was not losing his self-control. Wang Xinji was already at his peak. When Su Fengyan's head swung back in a semicircle, the old man was unexpectedly able to flourish even more. One punch to the end. With 11% of my essence, chi and spirit, I'll send you on your way. This old man's last battle in this world was not in vain. Su Fengyan, who was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight, no longer sent out a hand knife. Instead he drained the pond to catch fish. His remaining chi surged out and suddenly slammed his head forward, taking the initiative to meet Wang Xinji's fist. Su Fengyan was sent flying by the punch. His entire face was like a porcelain that was about to shatter. It was extremely frightening. Not only his face but his entire body was also in such a miserable state. After being hit, Wang Xinji did not feel good either. His footsteps were light and he staggered back. The arm that punched was hanging down. It was already fractured. Su Fengyan's body was about to fall and he smiled. In an instant, the person from Daylily, who was not too far away, threw out an instant spear. After Wang Xiaoping died, the sword pierced through Wang Xinji's body. This spear, following the trajectory, happened to once again pierce through Wang Xinji's chest, who could not dodge. The instant spear pierced through Wang Xinji's tall and sturdy body. The spearhead nailed into the ground diagonally. Wang Xinji was enveloped by the power of the spear and flew backward. However, compared to Su Fengyan, who fell heavily to the ground and raised yellow sand, the old man suddenly stopped when his back touched the ground. He strangely floated in the air and then slowly stood up. Wang Xinji was expressionless. He looked at the second Su Fengyan in the distance, who had 1 soul and 2 spirits. He hurriedly returned to his senses, but he still did not stop thousands of blood vessels from flowing out of the cracks in his body. Those who deserved to die could not die. Those who wanted to live could not live. Blood soaked his clothes and dyed the yellow sand red. Su Fengyan lay in the blood just like that. The young king of Bailiang, who was on the verge of death, looked at the sky with blurry vision. Su Fengyan closed his eyes. His soul floated out in all directions, and even Gao Shulu's body was no exception. Together they slowly swept towards Huang Longshi and Miss Hehe. He only hoped that the last bit of his cultivation could save the life of the silly girl who always liked to carry sunflowers. Wang Xinji finally spoke. Do you have any last wishes? Su Fengyin, whose vitality was gradually fading, did not speak. Before he left Wudong, he had already set up a plan. Beiliang hid a puppet, Su Fengyin, that looked like him. Even if he died in the battle and Beiliang lost the real Su Fengyin, there was still the king of Beiliang. In this way, as long as the Su family's banner did not fall, the morale of Beiliang's army would still be there. They would not be defeated by the million-strong cavalry of Beiliang. The Central Plains would probably see the smoke of war later. Chapter 11:14. On the previously secluded desert bordering Yuzhou and Helian prefectures, some untimely figures appeared out of nowhere. A child in a tattered fur coat and a white scarf was busy driving the flock of sheep. The land at the border was barren. Fortunately, the spring grass was plump compared to other seasons. Even so, the 6 or 7 old goats were still thin and dirty, looking like a group of lethargic old people. The child had a straw rope tied tightly around his waist. His cheeks were dark and thin. He had a wooden pole under his armpit and an old sheep whip in his hand. He walked and stopped with the flock of sheep eating grass. When he stopped, he would hold the sheep whip in his mouth and hold the pole with both hands, waving it wantonly. Occasionally he would imitate the posture of some adults in the village shaking the pole. Northern Liang worshipped martial arts, and its people were ferocious. There were many dens that were rich in hard martial arts. This was because the experts in the eyes of the common people were usually in a large group. Even the women and children knew some martial arts. For example, there was a saying in Yuzhou that 9 out of 10 sheep knew martial arts. This was the first half of the saying, and the second half was that only 1 out of 9 martial arts masters could be a great spear. It meant that it was easier to practice martial arts than spear. However, since ancient times, the poor studied while the rich practiced martial arts. Such a poor child would not be able to touch the threshold of spear arts in his lifetime. After that, the child saw a frightening scene more than 10 miles to the south. The earth suddenly shook, the sand suddenly rose, lightning flashed, and the wind was calm. The child was curious and thought that the flock of sheep would not get lost, so he began to drag the pole and whip to the south. He was thin and sallow, but his legs were not weak. Beiliang was very cold. Children from poor families were really weak. They could not survive the winter and could not be lazy. Therefore, children who grew up eating sand in the northwest frontier fortress, no matter how short and thin they were, would definitely lose in a fierce fight with their peers in rich Jiangnan. The child ran to the south, bending his back and rushing forward. He was unusually fast. While running and taking a few breaths, there were inexplicable explosions not far away. It was human nature to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. It was not that the child did not think of turning back, but there were a few times when his stubbornness overcame his timidity, and he gritted his teeth and continued running south. Just like that, the goat-herding child slowly approached the battlefield in a daze. Su Fengyin's soul floated over and found Huang Longshi and Miss Hehe. When the calculative Huang Xianxia saw this scene, the old man holding Hehe could not help but be shocked and stunned. Was the most powerful vassal king in Liang really going to die like this? How many days had it been since he became the emperor of the Northwest? His way of dying was quite spectacular, fighting a battle to the death with Wang Xinji. However, the people of the world were fond of the 4 words, although defeated with honor, but they didn't like to die with honor. Huang Longshi sat cross-legged and gently held his silly daughter in his arms. He was a little emotional. In Tai and City, he did not predict the choice of the wooden sword ranger. This time he also did not predict the choice of another young man. But no matter what, the boy named Su still came as promised. The 2 souls of Su Fengyin held Jiajiajia's hands respectively and transferred the last of their vitality to her. They tried their best to wash away the disaster planted by the old Taoist of Dragon Tiger Mountain. The girl's complexion gradually improved and became rosy. Huang Longshi had walked a long path in his life and had seen too many things in the world. The old man had sneaked into Beiliang several times. Not only did he think that Qinjibao was better than Su Fengyin, but he even appreciated Yuan Zhuozong more than his royal highness who was rotten on the outside. In the old man's eyes, the trick of hiding one's own stupidity was not a brilliant method worthy of admiration. This boy was born noble, so what if he was cursed? It was his fate to be constantly assassinated. Speaking of miserable endings, the people in Xiangfan City who were cooked by their relatives, were they not miserable? When the country was destroyed and their families were in exile, those children who were sold by their cruel parents according to their weight were not miserable. More recently, the little girl in his arms also had a miserable life. All living things were bitter and most of them were unspeakable. Even when Huang Longshi saw that Su Fengyin had resolutely descended the mountain to stop Wang Xinji without a perfect plan, he was only slightly surprised. He took it even more as a matter of course. This was something he owed to the daughter in his embrace in the first place. He even felt that this kid was extremely scheming, hoping that he, Huang Longshi, would lend a hand. Only when the situation was settled did Huang Longshi truly show some emotion. He asked softly, "You don't regret it?" Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. Although he opened his mouth without saying anything, it was enough for Huang Longshan to know the general meaning. The reason why I rushed here was not only because of the agreement, but also because I knew that even if I tried my best, I couldn't beat that old man. Since one of us would die anyway, I might as well let one live. Senior, you don't have to think too much. The two of them asked and answered. Why didn't you hide in the army at the border and avoid fighting? No matter how powerful Wang Xinji was, he would have to kill until his hands were tired before he could see you. I did think of that. But if I did, the army that Beiliang had worked so hard to gather would collapse. And if Wang Xinji chose to assassinate me in anger, I wouldn't be able to avoid it either. And if I was afraid of fighting, Gao Shulu's spirit would reject me even more. If I was caught by Wang Xinji, even if my third soul returned from a long journey, I would lose my foundation and would be doomed to die the moment I saw him. Rather than die a cowardly death, it would be better to have a proper fight. It would be best if he could survive. Even if he died, with Wang Xinji's magnanimity, she would not personally say that the new Prince Liang died at his hands. At that time it would appear that I am a fake Prince Liang and it would be useful. You're about to die, and you still want the Su family to continue guarding the northwest gate for the court? People speak the truth when they're about to die. It seems that in the past, this old man was measuring the stature of a gentleman with his own yardstick. Naturally, it's not guarding the gate for the emperor of the Zhao family. It's not even for the people of the Central Plains. It's just Su Zhao's family business. I promised him that I would take it. It's that simple. On top of that, it's a good thing if the South can suffer less and have fewer people die. First there was Qin Jibao, then there was Wang Xinji. These two mountains are not much lower than the mountains that the emperor of the Zhao family is facing with Su Xiao and Jianghu. Do you understand the grievances here? Removing the vassals is the general trend. It's just that the Su family and the Zhao family are on opposite sides. I don't deny that the one in Great Peace City is a wise ruler. On the contrary, he can not only establish a country like his ancestors, but also revive the dynasty. Even if he's at the end of a dynasty, he might be able to turn the tide and continue the dynasty. But this doesn't prevent me from being his mortal enemy. However, he wants Jianghu to die a horrible death. He should be going against the current. The poor people in the wilderness are constantly entering the court and squeezing out the positions of the Chinese families. It's not something that he can stop alone. Senior used 20 years to uproot the fields of the spring and autumn period. Master Li Yishan praised you endlessly. In the last years of Yonghui, Senior sneaked into Beiliang for the third time. After meeting with Chen Jibao, Su Xiao secretly mobilized most of the elites of the Fushui Association and 700 Autumn Water Light Cavalry, led by Lu Qiu, and Su Yanbing. They were determined to keep Senior here. But Master was determined to stop them, so they didn't move. There's such a thing? Yes. Many people have praised me in private, but Li Yishan's comment about me being a man of great ambition and extraordinary talent was the only one who hit the mark. Do you know why? I don't know. As they chatted, one of the two, Su Fengnian, absorbed the tribulation in Miss Hehe's body like a whale, and the other helped her to fill in the divine will. Huang Longshi smiled and said, "It's okay if you don't know." In another book, an ancient person named Kong Jigui wrote an ancient text called Northern Mountain Translation Text. The 8 words in it are very suitable for me. The sun is bright, and the frost is cold in autumn. Later, Huang Tingjian extended it and wrote a sentence. When young and talented, he will accept noble visits, but when old, he will be loyal and righteous. The two Su Fengnian were a little puzzled, but they didn't think too much about it. Huang Longshi thought for a moment and stretched out his palm to flatten the yellow sand at his feet. He used his finger to write 14 words. The lantern of the house of the rich is bright, and the moon of the poor is bright. The old man then muttered to himself, "It can be said that the taste of the imperial edict is profound, and the feelings of the world are extremely clear." As a person who forgot worries, the soul of the Su Fengnian nodded. Huang Longshi continued to use his finger as a pen and the sand as paper to write the second sentence. But with others, the fish knows that the water is cold and the water is warm. If one is not satisfied, one will often be 8 or 9, regardless of whether the flowers bloom or fall in spring. The soul of the Su Fengnian, who had borrowed Wang Xiaoping's sword, laughed it off. Huang Longshi quickly wrote the third sentence. There is no end to numbers and there is no long misfortune. The old man then raised his head and looked at the Su Fengnian. The Su Fengnian nodded and then shook his head. Huang Longshi lowered his head and looked at the little girl in his arms who had turned around and returned from the gates of hell. He said softly, "This old man once used Wenhua to scheme against you. Don't you bear a grudge?" "How could I not bear a grudge? It's just that there are differences in the size of the grudge, and there are differences in the order of revenge." "That should be the case." Huang Longshi nodded and said, "The poem in the book that was mentioned earlier for the old man Wang Xinji, it was already considered old and awe-inspiring. But he is 100 years old and is the most powerful person in the world. In the end, bullying a younger person who hasn't even reached the age of 30 is not an act of kindness." The Su Fengnian, who had rushed to the battlefield with the spear of Xana, stared tenderly at the girl. Everyone has their own way of living, but some fundamental principles are the same. It's just that Wang Xinji had one sentence that blocked all the words. His fist is hard so he can ignore the principles of others. Since I have lost, there is no way for me to reason with him. At this point the girl was about to wake up. The two Su Fengnian did their best, stood up and left. Chapter 11:15. When Huang Longshi saw the two of them leaving, his expression turned serious. He looked at the sky and gently put down his daughter who was slowly opening her eyes. He stood up and muttered to himself, "This old man doesn't trust anyone and is used to judging others with the greatest malice. You Su Fengnian are in a situation where you have nowhere to retreat to, yet you still do things to satisfy this old man. It seems that this old man has indeed misjudged you in the past." Huang Longshi smiled and turned his head, seemingly answering his own question. "Su Fengnian, you definitely don't know that the reason why the last person who was spiritually traveling to the spring and autumn period could not leave the spring and autumn period was because this old man purposely closed this book. That was why he could not leave that page. Now that things have come to this old man can no longer hide it. Helping you is also helping himself." The old man lamented, "Who will wake up first? Only you will know." Huang Longshi took a deep breath. This old man could have achieved the realm of Confucian Saint long ago, but he purposely suppressed it. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a fleeting Xinyuan Jingqing after the spring and autumn period. This old man will give you a true carefree journey. Huang Longshi raised his arm, drew strokes and pointed at it. He wrote 8 words. "I write the spring and autumn period to respect the heavens and earth." He flipped open the book and opened the door. It was as if a door opened behind Huang Longshi. A person stepped out and answered softly, "The heavens and earth naturally respect me. Morning farewell, White Emperor, colorful clouds." White Emperor, one of the 5 celestial emperors in the ancient book, was in charge of all the gods of the West. Wang Xinji looked at the colorful clouds gathering and dispersing above her head. She had an epiphany and roughly understood her background. No wonder she was at odds with the Jianghu great emperor of the north. When Jianghu's law form descended to the spring god lake, Wang Xinji, who was in the martial emperor city, hated it bitterly. Wang Xinji did not stop Su Fengnian's soul from escaping, nor did she stop them from returning. Sensing the weak aura of Su Fengnian lying in a pool of blood, Wang Xinji looked at the northern sky and asked loudly, "Fight again in the sky?" The sky did not respond to Wang Xinji's question. However, someone in the human world replied with 2 words, "No need." A huge firefly crashed into Su Fengnian's bloody body. Wang Xinji frowned and turned to look in that direction. Su Fengnian knelt on the ground with one knee and one hand on the ground. He said softly, "We don't have to fight in the sky." Wang Xinji narrowed her eyes and stared at the young man who had perfected the divine will. She was a little puzzled. She was not dead yet. The old man looked at Huang Longshi's situation and quickly understood. This young vassal took a different path from Yuan Qingshan of Beimang. He wanted to merge the 3 religions of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism. Unfortunately, he lacked the most important style of Confucianism. Wang Xinji did not think there was anyone in the world who could make Su Fengnian understand this realm. If Chao Changqing gave up his cultivation, well, there was a 50 to 60% chance. However, this official in black wanted to restore the country. Even if he liked Su Fengnian very much, he would not let his emotions affect his decisions. He wanted to restore the country in West Chu and give it to someone else. However, Wang Xinji did not expect that the cold-hearted Huang Sanjia would do such a thing and really let the last wanderer of spring and autumn win. This meant that this kind of gift of inheritance could not be accepted by the other person just because one person gave it to the other. Just like when Su Fengnian first went to Mount Wudong to practice the blade, Wang Zhongluo did not hesitate to give away the cultivation of the Great Yellow Court. However, in the end he only gave away 60 to 70%, which was a serious loss. It was far from letting the young His Royal Highness achieve immortality in one step. Huang Longshi's action was no different from gambling. However, if he gave away the realm but could not make Su Fengnian accept it completely and only made half of the Confucian sage, which was useless in the end, then it would be the biggest joke in the world. Wang Xinji's injury was not fatal, but it was not light either. Especially that instant spear, which could be considered the most embarrassing time since he reached the top of martial arts 60 years ago. The old man still could not let it go. It was not a matter of the severity of his injury, but that no matter how Wang Xinji deduced afterward, he could not avoid it. Su Fengnian grabbed a handful of sand, stood up and opened his palm. The yellow sand was blown away by the wind and was thrown into the sky. A line went far away and seeped into the colorful clouds. Like mud sprinkled on brocade, it scattered the wind in an instant. Su Fengnian's 3 souls and 6 spirits had returned to his body. Although his face, which was torn apart by Wang Xinji, had not healed, it was still shocking. However, his momentum was majestic and incomparable. Wang Xinji's expression was calm, but there was a slight ripple in his heart. However, his will to fight had never been as high as it was now. This was like a person standing alone on the highest floor and finally seeing a second person walk up to the top. There was no first place in literature, so they despised each other. There was no second place in martial arts, so they killed each other. Wang Xinji, who had always let the younger generation show off all kinds of amazing moves, took a step back and a step forward. This was the first time she took the initiative to make a fighting stance. Su Fengnian took a step forward and a short knife appeared in his hand. He held the spring thunder upside down. The second step was a long one. He held the winter-embroidered knife, which was slightly longer. The 2 knives given or borrowed by Bai Hu Er's face accompanied him through the 2 Jianghu and Liang and Beimang. Spring thunder on the left and winter-embroidered knife on the right. Su Fengnian rushed to the front of Wang Xinji with 2 knives in his hands and chopped down with the winter-embroidered knife. Wang Xinji raised her hand and held the winter-embroidered knife, which did not emit any blade light. Her right hand was about to blast out in an attempt to smash the boy's chest. The young man's will had reached the peak, but Gao Shulu's body was still on the verge of collapse. However, before Wang Xinji could make a move, the spring thunder knife came horizontally. It was actually faster than Wang Xinji's by 11%. The 2 knives looked light and easy. Other than the word fast, there seemed to be no other mystery. However, Wang Xinji unexpectedly used her elbow to block the knife and then retreated. Su Fengnian followed like a shadow and always kept a distance of 1 knife from Wang Xinji. The winter-embroidered knife stabbed Wang Xinji's wound, which was made by the instant spear. Wang Xinji was not afraid. She let the dangerous knife stab her, but her fist smashed towards Su Fengnian's neck. Su Fengnian's figure swayed, and the embroidered saber left his hand, barely dodging Wang Xinji's heavy punch. His body drifted past Wang Xinji, and then he grabbed the embroidered winter saber that came out of Wang Xinji's body. It was really a leisurely stroll. Chapter 11:16. Since he did not manage to plant a follow-up chi in the winter-embroidered saber, the saber strike seemed to have severely injured Wang Xinji, but it was more of a humiliation. Wang Xinji was finally forced to the point where he could be calculative. He did not turn around to pursue the attack. Instead, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and used his back to crash into Su Fengnian. He made up his mind. It did not matter if he took 1 or several slashes. As long as he could completely crush Su Fengnian's body, the outcome would be decided. Su Fengnian, whose back was facing Wang Xinji, took a few steps to the side and brushed past Wang Xinji again. When their gazes met, Su Fengnian slashed his saber at Wang Xinji's neck. Wang Xinji suddenly sped up. Not only did he lower his head to avoid the bright blade, but he also staggered towards Su Fengnian's side. He pushed his palm forward and pushed it towards Su Fengnian's shoulder. Su Fengnian twisted the tip of his foot and spun half a circle. He used the inverted spring thunder saber's blade to block Wang Xinji's palm. Wang Xinji clenched his fist and clamped the blade between his thumb and index finger. He was about to break the short saber. Unexpectedly, Su Fengnian casually swung his winter-embroidered saber horizontally. The tip of the saber brushed past the hilt of the spring thunder saber. The latter kept spinning. Not only did it avoid Wang Xinji's grip on the saber and his subsequent attempt to destroy it, but the short saber also spun around the old man before it finally fell back into Su Fengnian's hand. Wang Xinji kicked out. Su Fengnian leaped high into the air. Wang Xinji threw a punch. He no longer hoped that his fist would hit flesh. Instead, he used his fist force. Wang Xinji seemed to be in a tight spot, but the might of his fist force surpassed all his previous moves. It was clear that the old man was still holding back. Su Fengnian's figure suddenly flashed and disappeared. He appeared dozens of feet away with his sabers in hand. His sleeves fluttered. Similarly, there was a hidden mystery. As Wang Xinji ran forward, he laughed loudly and said, "Are you that unhappy?" Su Fengnian did not say anything. Just as Wang Xinji was about to reach him, he casually tossed the Spring Thunder Saber into the air. Instead of holding Winter Embroidered in his right hand, he gripped the saber with both hands and charged at Wang Xinji. Wang Xinji and Su Fengnian slowed down at the same time. Then, on the battlefield, wherever Wang Xinji went, a figure would appear. Then they would attack Su Fengnian together. On the other hand, Su Fengnian continued to run forward without hesitation. Xiao Dong slashed towards an empty space where Wang Xinji was not. In the blink of an eye, another Wang Xinji slid back a few feet. A thin line of blood appeared on his forehead, and blood slowly seeped out. At the same time, the hundreds of Wang Xinji disappeared. The world would never have imagined that the great Wang Xinji would be defeated by someone else. Su Fengnian continued to get close to Wang Xinji, pointing the Winter Embroidered saber in front of her. Everyone stopped when it was appropriate. Countless tiny wounds appeared on Wang Xinji's body. He did not let Wang Xinji get close to him, but he could leave a mark on Wang Xinji's body every time. The Spring Thunder saber that was tossed into the air reached its peak and began to fall. Wang Xinji's patience was probably exhausted by such tireless and precise calculations. What followed was an extremely fast close combat. The wounds on his body from Winter Embroidered saber became deeper and deeper, but Wang Xinji was also getting closer and closer to Su Fengnian. The most dangerous time was when Wang Xinji's palm almost broke Su Fengnian's neck, and Su Fengnian's Winter Embroidered saber almost cut Wang Xinji's waist in half. However, both of them gave up on the hope of exchanging lives this time. The falling Spring Thunder saber was getting closer and closer to the battlefield on the ground. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and mottled, and it was unbearable to look at. However, no matter how fast the two of them attacked, the yellow sand remained motionless 1 zhang away from where the two of them were standing. Not a single grain of sand moved. Victory and defeat were only a hair's breadth away. Wang Xinji gave his all. He was still in the predicament of being cut by a slow saber. Intentionally or unintentionally, the Spring Thunder saber had already landed 3 feet above Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian, who used his left hand to begin with, had a sudden surge in his aura. The space he had to move around had already been squeezed to the extreme by Wang Xinji. If he did not have any new moves, he would not be able to escape death. However, as long as he could hold that short saber, variables could be created. Because Wang Xinji's chi flowed for 1,000 miles. Although he became braver and stronger as he fought, and his chi became stronger and stronger, it was also about to come to an end. Both of them were well aware of this. Wang Xinji's laughter was not straightforward. He was laughing at Su Fengnian and also mocking himself. Therefore, from the beginning, Wang Xinji actually planned to end the life and death of both of them in one go. At the last moment, Su Fengnian risked a punch to catch the Spring Thunder saber. As long as he could hold the saber, he could take advantage of the situation to reverse the battle. However, Wang Xinji actually stopped after half a punch. The chi was about to end and unexpectedly, it reversed 1,000 miles again. It was about to form a majestic new chi. In a battle of the same level, the flow of chi was in front, and the turn was behind. The speed of the flow could control the situation, but the instant change could determine life and death. Wang Xinji's final battle in the human world as well as the final finishing move, lay in this unprecedented back and forth. The trick was the word reverse. Wang Xinji withdrew half of his fist without warning. He deliberately let Su Fengnian hold the saber so that he could complete the chi of 1,000 miles first. Then he would take the first step and the second step would be first and kill with one strike. Suddenly, a strange expression appeared on the old man's face. Su Fengnian did not hold the Spring Thunder saber, which was close at hand. Wang Xinji withdrew his hand to take a breath. Su Fengnian withdrew his hand and continued to attack. On the contrary, Su Fengnian seized the opportunity. What surprised Wang Xinji even more was that Su Fengnian's Winter Embroidered saber accurately crashed into the node of his old and new chi. It was not his heart or neck, but a seemingly insignificant acupuncture point. Su Fengnian charged forward with the bump saber. He even pressed his left hand on the back of the saber. Wang Xinji was forced to retreat dozens of feet just like that. No matter how old he was, he could not stop the arrival of the new winter season. Wang Xinji's chi was rapidly dispersing. His white hair fluttered wildly. Su Fengnian lifted his saber diagonally and returned the favor. He lifted Wang Xinji's burly body off the ground. He did not pull out the winter-embroidered saber which was used to suppress qi. After releasing his right hand, he held the spring thunder saber that had been following behind him with his left hand. Before Wang Xinji pulled out the winter-embroidered saber with both hands, Su Fengyan's spring thunder saber pierced through Wang Xinji's head. The winter-embroidered saber was not pulled out. It was the same for the spring thunder saber. The spring thunder saber that pierced through Wang Xinji's head hovered in the air. Then he forced Wang Xinji to hang in the air.